Apparently not. Good evening. I'm going to open this meeting of the City Council and the Planning Commission for a special meeting workshop agenda. And if you would please join me, and I'll call this meeting to order, and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, if you will. Is there a flag?
There's one right there.
Where's that?
Carol now.
How perfect. Okay, stand in one place, Carol, please.
Stand still, Carol.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, will you please do the roll call?
Present for the record are Mayor David, Council Members Davis, Sass, Holland, and Lane.
Thank you. This, I think we have a plan for that. Thank you. This is a council meeting, so under public communications, this is the public's opportunity to speak on any topic that's not listed on this agenda. Just a reminder that this agenda has one topic, so hopefully you're all here for that topic. And however, if you want to speak to something that's not on the agenda, this is your opportunity to do so. Wonderful. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment, and I'm going to turn this over to our acting city manager, Chief Jeff Meston, who will then turn it over to you, Kevin, in a moment to introduce the Planning Commission.
Good evening and welcome to everyone. Since we're meeting in a different room, I'd like to call your attention to all the exits. In the event of an emergency, there are clearly marked exits, and if the alarm goes off, we would expect you to leave out of there orderly. I'm going to turn this over right now to Kevin Fabino, and he's going to introduce the Planning Commission, and then when he's completed, I'll give you at least a little guidance on some of the roles of the City Council and the Planning Commission this evening. Kevin, all to you.
Thank you very much, Acting City Manager. I am Kevin Fabino. I'm the Director of Development Services. In accordance with the Brown Act, we do have the Planning Commission sitting, listening, and actively participant with the Council. And so in order to follow the Brown Act, I do need to take roll call. And so the roll call is as follows, and that is our Chairman Brown, and we have Commissioner Dwyer, Commissioner Palacio, Commissioner Woodward, and Commissioner Orr. Again, as we procedurally go through the Brown Act, this would also be an opportunity for any member of the public to speak to the Planning Commission on any agenda item or any item not on today's agenda. And so if you'd like to speak to the council members or the Planning Commission on any topic not on the agenda, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll turn it back to Chief Meston to proceed.
Thank you very much. I'd like to clarify the rules this evening so you know what we're really all about this evening. The City Council's responsibility is to gather information. Ultimately, at a City Council meeting, they will take that information and give some direction to the City Attorney for an ordinance. The Planning Commission's role this evening really is to pay attention and to be engaged in the discussion that goes along on issues that will ultimately go to the Planning Commission as a whole. The public and the committee's role is to provide information, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in a tidy fashion in the next couple hours. So with that, I'd like to turn this back over to our Mayor Wendy David.
Thank you very much. I'm so really happy to see everyone here tonight. This is a community process. We look forward to community input tonight. We look forward to community questions. We're very pleased to have the Planning Commission here joining us tonight. And so we're going to begin our process by looking at the recommendations of our working group. After that, just so you have an idea how the night's going to flow, we're going to be then having clarifying questions coming from our bodies, the Planning Commission and the City Council. We may have some clarifying questions, and then we will be getting some info from our department heads, probably taking a little break, and then coming back and getting a lot of public information and public comment from you as well.
Can I kind of explain how we got here?
Very quickly.
Yeah. I just want to explain how we got here. Been a long journey. Back in October, the council appointed a subcommittee of myself and Brooke Lane, and then we got this very prestigious cross-section group in the community together, and I think we had 26 hours of meetings and dialogue and discussion. So out of that, and now we start the public process. We've always promised the public you'd have a chance to come forward and give us your concerns and comments. So, long path, we're here. Now we're ready for public comment.
Mr. Middlebrook.
Thank you, Mayor David. For the record, Devin Middlebrook. I'm a member of the Cannabis Subcommittee and a resident of the city of South Lake Tahoe. Similar to as I did at 2 city council meetings ago, I'm going to go through our working group recommendations, a little bit about the process, and then lead us into the further discussion tonight on some of the hot button issues. As Mr. Davis mentioned, we did have 6 meetings, over 24 hours worth of meetings, and there is a plethora of state recommendations on cannabis regulations that we discussed in great detail, sometimes 2 or 3 times, even after we made decisions, we went back. Tonight, we do have limited time. Obviously, we don't want to be here for the next 24 hours. So there's a lot of regulations that the state has done, we think, a very good job of laying out, and would be difficult to add anything on top of those regulations. So I'll call those out, and I'll also call out the points where we had additional regulations in addition to the state's terms, and our recommendations based mainly on license types and location of those businesses. After each of our recommendations, to make our discussion later in the evening a little more poignant and to the point, after each recommendation, I'm going to ask both Planning Commission and City Council if any of the members have interest in discussing a topic further. An example of that would be packaging. The state has very rigorous regulations around packaging, and our committee does not recommend any additional regulations around that topic. Personally, as a subcommittee meeting, I don't feel that the best value in our time here tonight and the time of the public is to go over and discuss something like packaging. So really making it where if you have a topic that you really want to discuss further and you have either significant questions or worries or additions to the Cannabis Subcommittee's recommendations, those are the topics, and I think they'll become pretty self-evident as we go through this process, that we really want to discuss. Again, we don't want to spend our time discussing every regulation, otherwise we'll be here until tomorrow morning, maybe even Friday. So just setting that context. Again, our Cannabis Subcommittee was made up of Council members Brooke Lane and Tom Davis, Police Chief Euler, City Attorney Nira, and Lisa Watson, and they were non-voting members of the subcommittee, but were excellent resources in terms of city responsibilities, city enforcement, and legal implications. We also had a volunteer regulatory expert by the name of Dustin Moore. He came in and volunteered his time and was really a great asset in making the several 100-page regulations of the state into easy-to-understand language that really helped provide a lot of context for us that were at the beginning of the process unfamiliar with what was in those regulations. And then all of our community members, some of that are not here tonight, of the Cannabis Subcommittee, and they really, I'm not going to go through each person, but they all greatly contributed their opinion of a true cross-section of our community. We have both sides of the spectrum, from anti-cannabis to pro-cannabis, to in the middle, from the youth perspective, like Jude Wood of the Boys and Girls Club, the Drug Free Coalition with Kelsey, some of the more, I guess, pro side with Liz Halen, and really a cross-section business members like David Turner here. So really, I think the City Council did a great job selecting a diverse group that really came together. Again, there's pro, there's con, there's in the middle. We really came together with solid recommendations that I think give consideration to all sides of this very, very complex issue and offer a very good starting point. So I really urge the Council and Planning Commission to take our recommendations with, you know, some seriousness and some weight to the time we went through to develop them. I think it's also important to understand the purpose here tonight, in addition to Chief Meston's notes. You know, we really developed recommendations to guide city staff and decision makers. So we're a starting point. Like I said, we went through 24 hours of deliberation. We picked out the real controversial items, the items we really want to talk about, and those are what we should focus on. And we're providing a starting point, but I think it's a real good starting point instead of from scratch. We're also providing a framework for this conversation tonight and future decision-making down the line. I think it's also to understand that legalized cannabis is the new normal. Both in California and Nevada, cannabis for recreational use is now legal. That's not going away. That's not changing. Cannabis is here, and we can either run and hide from it and deal with the consequences of it living on the black market, or we can address it, make safe, progressive recommendations and an ordinance that allows us to have a local, healthy, and responsible industry, get revenue generated to protect our community and offer support services for treatment and prevention and youth education and keeping it out of youth's hands. It really gives us control over the market that we wouldn't have if we just decide to put forward a moratorium or very strict regulations. It's not going anywhere, so we need to be smart about addressing it. And here are a number of the state operating requirements that we are recommending no changes on. I'll describe each of these in more detail in the next following slides, but I just wanted to give an overcap. Those are packaging, dosages, testing, and hours of operation. So those, again, we are not recommending any additional changes. The rest we have some comments on, and you'll see those in a second. So packaging, all packaging, again, the state has thought through the regulations very thoroughly. Packaging needs to be in what a child-safe, almost Ziploc bags. It's a heavy-duty, opaque bag, warning labels on it, clearly labeled cannabis. It's child-proof. It's very tamper-proof. That must be given out. You can't have edible products that look like Starburst or gummy bears or Fruit Loops. They need to be not attractive to children. The cannabis products have to have a warning label. And really, we don't think there needs to be anything on top of this. To expect cannabis manufacturers across the state to comply to our small towns' extra rigorous packaging standards simply does not make sense for the market. Dosaging. So the state has very strict regulations around dosaging. For those that are familiar, it is 10 milligrams of THC per serving for edibles with no more than 100 milligrams per package. And those need to be delineated. So if you think of a chocolate bar, it could have little squares that have scores in them, and each of them are 10 milligrams worth of THC, which, for those who are not familiar, that is, you know, not an extreme amount of THC. That's enough to feel it, but not enough to be completely intoxicated. Obviously, it depends on the person how much it's going to affect you. And then there's also regulations on a daily limit of purchase of an ounce of flour or 8 grams of concentrates, which is actually about half of those in Nevada, with currently a dispensary operating very closely in Incline Village, but also down in the valley. Testing, all cannabis products must be tested by a licensed facility for potency, insecticides, all that good stuff. In the very thick regulations, about a quarter of that is on testing regulations, again, to require additional testing on top of what the state's already rigorous requirements really does not make sense. And then finally, hours of operation. The state lays out that hours of operations can be between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. We went with these recommendations from the state with no additional restrictions. We do not expect cannabis retail shops to be operating and selling at 6 a.m. However, based on the state regulations, for them to accept deliveries, process payments, ship bills, any of the day-to-day business things that happen behind the scenes must happen during their hours of operation. So if we limited those, we would also limit the business's ability to process and handle behind-the-scenes operations. So since we're at the beginning, are there any of these items that anyone on the City Council or Planning Commission would like to discuss in further detail because they think there should be extra regulations on top of them? Great. So now we're going to get on to the operating enhancements that we are recommending on top of the state regulations. First, for employees, the state lays out that all employees must be at least 21 years of age to work there. Some local enhancements, especially after discussing enforcement with the chief in detail, we are recommending that employees go through some sort of background check, similar to either a live scan or alternative, and no employees should have a non-cannabis related felony. We are also saying that the business operators should be responsible for offering training on all state and local regulations, safe use and consumption, and to their employees, so their employees can intelligently speak about the local rules and regulations, especially for a tourism market, making sure that tourists know where and where they can't consume, what our local rules are, the fact that we have a border and you can't transport across that. So we want the staff working in these locations to be trained and know the rules of our community and protect our community's health and well-being. And then we are also recommending to require on-the-job sobriety outside of obviously medicinal uses for cannabis. If an employee does have a medicinal card, that would be an exemption. But obviously you don't want to go into a bar with a bartender that's falling over drunk. You don't want to go into a cannabis retail location with an employee that is too high to do their job. Again, all of these are things that the last two are things that we put on the business owners to, be upstanding and follow our rules. Enforcement may be a little difficult on these two topics, but we really want the people operating in our community to have the community's best interests in mind. So is there anyone that would like to discuss our local enhancements to employees further as part of our topic?
I got a question, Devin.
Yes.
I never understand this. How do you figure 71.6?
Yeah, we'll get
in
to
the
that.
audience, and the .6 gets me. You're either a full person or you're not.
No, yeah, definitely. We'll get to advertising and signage next, but just real quickly, does anyone want to in-depth discuss additional recommendations for employee security?
Yeah, so Devin, you mentioned this already, the enforcement, like competency verification of regulations and on-the-job sobriety, so I'm not sure if we should talk to somebody on the city staff about enforcement, because that definitely is, making rules that we can't enforce
Yeah,
is definitely
we'll-
a concern.
We'll note that, and when the section on the agenda comes up of staff discussion, we'll make sure that that gets covered.
I have one additional comment on the age 21. I remember in one of the presentations we had early on, it was talking about brain development and brain development not being developed until, I think it was 25 or 26.
Yes.
And so I just have a question about the reasoning behind being 21 when we know perhaps that brain development and just a 21-year-old who's an employee also being that much more exposed if they work in a cannabis facility.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of research out there on that 25, 26 age developing brain. Cannabis, obviously not just cannabis, alcohol, all of
Yes.
that. But we went with the state recommendations because it is 21 to consume.
Well, I
So
thought these were enhanced local
the
recommendations.
ones under the bold are the local enhancements.
Oh.
The one above it is just the state regulation.
Okay.
So we're saying all the state says is 21 years old, and we're saying on top of that, background checks, training, on-the-job sobriety.
And I guess what I'm saying is
Yeah.
maybe in-depth conversation later
Yeah.
about possibly having a higher age for employees.
And then, so moving on to advertising and signage.
I would actually, from the Planning Commission, jump in. I would not mind knowing if we think the background check local enhancement would disproportionately affect people of color.
Perfect. So advertising and signage, as Mr. Davis alluded to, the state regulation says advertising can only take place where at least 0.6% of the audience is reasonably expected to be 21 years of age and older. I don't know how they came up on that percentage. It may be linked to alcohol and tobacco, history of that, but most major marketing, newspapers, radio stations, magazines, all keep detailed records of their demographics and their viewership, and most can provide you with that number of what their market's reasonably expected to be. Yes. So our local enhancement recommendations on top of this is less of a formal recommendation, but something we wanted to make to be very clear. You'll obviously have to, on your building, apply to all local, city, and TRPA signage requirements. Those are already very thorough and very strict, so nothing on top of those, just making it clear that those would apply. As a recommendation that we've agreed to with Chief Euler, no TV or radio advertising. This is to make sure that really make sure that 71.6% is met. And really, I think it's also a thing of, with the internet nowadays, it's not going to be difficult to find any of these locations. So just keeping it out of TV and radio, where those are sort of the most visible forms, especially in our community-driven tourism market. It's safer to just keep them out. This may be an enforcement issue that we could discuss later with stations, radio stations and TV stations based out of Reno, and the enforcement of local businesses and other businesses not here advertising on stations we happen to get. We also have, if anyone's familiar with the symbol of the green cross to delineate medical cannabis, we want to make sure there's a restricted use on that green cross and really reserved only for medicinal in-store signification. As Kelsey described from the Drug-Free Coalition's point of view, you don't want that green cross and the idea that it's medicine, it can solve everything, really permeating into the viewpoint and the opinion children have on the substance. So we want to really reserve that green cross and the idea that it's a wonder drug that solves all ailments. You really want to keep that out of the view of the children, so that's the reason behind that. And then on top of that, no sandwich boards. So no sandwich boards at all times for these retail locations, just to keep them a little more discreet. Again, I don't think anyone in today's day of the age of the internet is going to have trouble finding any of these locations. So is there any points under advertising and signage people would like discussed in more detail?
So advertising on Facebook is allowed on your
Yes.
definition? So
As long as it conforms to that 71.6%.
you can't control whether it's 71.6 or not.
You can, if you can control age, there are age restrictions on Facebook.
Anybody can get onto Facebook.
Anyone can get onto Facebook, but if you're advertising on Facebook, there's restrictions you can put on your campaign thing, where I know on Facebook from previous advertisements I've done that if you're advertising something like beer, Facebook screens the images in the ad and the text in the ad. If it flags alcohol and your settings aren't to people over 21, it does not run that advertising.
If a kid jumps on their mother's internet Facebook page, they
We're
can
not
access
promising
anything.
that you can stop all of it, Austin, but I'm just saying that, you know, online, you have to at least allow them to advertise somewhere, and I think
So
restricting it off
could-
TV and radio.
You could limit online advertising to sites that specialize, like weeds, for example.
I think that's something we could discuss further, especially when the chief, if we get into the enforcement. But I imagine having someone watchdog every internet site for ads about Tahoe cannabis locations is not an effective use of enforcement dollars.
We can agree to disagree.
Anyone else would like to discuss more on this topic? Public education. So this is a very important topic that we talked in length about at the Cannabis Subcommittee, and one of the few points during the presentation we're really going to get into this. So right now the city or the state has a fund of the revenue generated that's going to go to public outreach and education about safe consumption, prevention, treatment, and youth and children's safety. That is called their Let's Talk campaign. So the state will have money for that, investing in a statewide campaign. There will also be grants made available for local communities to enhance that program. Obviously, being a rural community, our chances of winning grants against big urban areas with more people is somewhat low, and we know that. So we're locally recommending that some of the revenue generated to enhance, locally generated, and we're not dictating a percentage now, obviously, be dedicated to enhancing community education programs, building off the state's Let's Talk campaign, working with community groups like the Drug-Free Coalition, the mental health group, to really target where we need that education around safe use, getting it out of the youth's hands, treatment and prevention, and really have a local source of self-help funding for public education. Very important. We also would recommend that retailers, as a condition of operating, have a public education campaign. This includes signage in their stores about safe use, consumption, the local regulations. In their bags when they give product to take home, those bags include rack cards and brochures on safe use and consumption. That the retailer locations participate in groups like the Drug Free Coalition to be part of the conversation and help steer the messaging and not just be subject to it. And then Kelsey has an example. Right now, the Drug Free Coalition offers these extra heavy-duty lock bags that are similar to a bank bag with an actual lock and key. This is additional. This is definitely more secure than the state recommended child-proof Ziploc bags, but having funding to make sure that, as it is today, that these are available for free to anyone that would want them at any of the locations. So if they have children at home, this is an extra layer of security so those products don't get into children's hands. And having a funding source to fund these will guarantee that those are available to anyone in the community. So would anyone like to talk in further detail around the ideas of public education? Again, our goal tonight is not to talk about what campaign messages need to be made, where to reach it, or any of that, but just the fact of, do we want to support it or do we want to not support it locally with some revenue generation? Great. So security. The state regulates digital surveillance systems that meet minimum specifications. So those are things like it needs to be HD quality, 1280 by 720 pixels. You need to have a storage device that's accessible through the internet. You need to have those systems in certain locations. It dictates that. You have to store at least 90 days worth of video. It needs to record 24 hours a day. Keep it for 90 days. And then the Bureau of Cannabis Control of the state has those video surveillance is available to the Bureau upon request. And the licensee shall provide all recordings to the Bureau upon request when specified by the Bureau. So that is something that the state has direct access to. Our local recommendation is allowing the local police department that same authority. So instead of Chief Euler having to ask the state to ask a retail location or another location for access to the video and records of the video, that power is given directly to the police department. So it really just cuts out that bureaucratic step of going to the state and offers a little more local control over enforcement and making sure that this is all being done above board. It also, obviously, being for recreational use, you need to verify that anyone entering the premise is 21 years older as an adult or 18 for medical with a physician's recommendation. And our local recommendation is just to require an electronic ID verification system, similar to at 7-Eleven when you buy alcohol, they swipe your ID through the card reader to make sure it's valid. We're not recommending these be kept or any of the names in it tracked, just simply an extra layer of verification, especially in a tourism market where we're going to have IDs from all over the country. I could maybe spot a California fake ID. I definitely couldn't spot a Minnesota fake ID. So just another layer of security on top of it. So would anyone like to discuss in further detail any of these two security recommendations? We do have more enforcement regulations we'll go over shortly.
What kind of notice is required for the police department to do a request of video? Is it based on a complaint or a problem, or just they'll say to themselves, okay, it's Tuesday, we're going to check all the shops and ask for video
I don't know the
footage?
specific triggers of that at a state level, but from the regulations, the Bureau can view and obtain copies of the recording at licensed premises immediately upon request. So it seems like if the Bureau has any idea of something going wrong, they just want to check in, they're doing inspections, it's pretty much, we ask for it, you hand it over, we have access to it all the time.
Will we have, since we will be adopting stricter standards than that?
Yes.
will we have specific policies that will address that everybody is aware of?
I think that's something that can be developed by the police department and the chief over time, but I think our recommendation is just giving exactly what's in the state's laws to us as far as the video access goes.
Okay. I just had some Fourth
Yeah.
Amendment rights questions, so thank you.
On the medical side, are there any HEPA regulations that come into play with the video? Do you know of?
I would default to NERA on that. I'm not a expert on HIPAA.
Under the state laws, cannabis records and recommendations are now HIPAA protected.
Great, so I've marked that down. Anything on the electronic ID verification system that anyone would like to discuss further on that? Great. So enforcement, and I think there's a couple other spots in addition to this that we'll really dive into enforcement, but the state allows local police no notice inspections of operations. We're also locally recommending that, similar to public education, a portion of revenue generated locally is dedicated to enforcement. Again, those percentages and the needs of the police department are really to be determined. We want to make sure we have money for the local police department, not dependent on state funding and state grants. We also recommend automatic closure for retail locations for upheld intentional violations. This isn't if you accidentally break one of the rules. This is clear intent, clearly skimming product off the side, clearly selling to underage people, intentionally doing it, and it being upheld through the normal, violation appeals process. So that's really saying, hey, it's you intentionally mess up once, thank you, but try again. And then also, the state has 24-hour immediate access to the business records online from all cannabis locations. So we're again recommending that the local police department is afforded that as well, to cut out that bureaucratic step of having to go to the state, go to the retail location, back to the state, back to the locals. So anything on any of those specific points in enforcement that people would like to discuss further? So now we're going to get into I think the nitty-gritty where more discussion is going to be warranted, and we're going to dive into the recommended business license types. So here's a summary of all the license types through the city. Some are left off, and I'll get into that with detail for reason. Retail, delivery, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing. So retail. Our initial recommendation as a working group is to allow up to 3 retail locations. So those 3 retail locations, the reasoning, the logic we came to that, at a state level, the state is recommending roughly 1 retail location per 10,000 residents in a city. Tahoe has, about 23,000 in our incorporated area, but so that would be about a little over 2 retail locations, but we have a very big tourism market. We all know how busy it gets on the weekends, 4th of July, so that's why we rounded up to 3. This is obviously something we wanted to start slow with, and I think a discussion the group had over great length was, wanting to start slow, start smart. We can always add more retail locations. It's a lot more difficult to take retail locations away. So we think 3 is a very conservative number that falls in line with the state's recommendations for towns that don't necessarily have a giant tourism market like we do. All of these retail locations would have to have an M-type license, which is for medicinal use. So we want to ensure patient access. We want to make sure that patients can get their medicinal product that has less taxes on it, might be specialty for them. We want to make sure that access is granted. We are recommending that products that are being sold are pre-packaged only, aka not deli style. Deli style, obviously if you think of like a Subway, maybe. You go in, they have large jars of cannabis flower product. You say how much you want. They take some out with some tongs, weigh it, bag it for you. You walk out of the store with your product. That offers chance for diversion people skimming off the top. It's just, it's a lot less secure, so we're recommending prepackaged products only. And then this one we are allowing, as a final recommendation, allowing on-site consumption. So that would be being allowed to use cannabis products on-site at these retail locations in a controlled, safe environment. I thought this quote from Lori Ajax, who's the California's chief of the Bureau of Cannabis Control, on this topic, that said, if you can't consume in public, which you can't, you have to have places where people can consume it, or it doesn't work very well. I think that is expounded by our tourism market. We have hotels, Airbnbs, rentals. None of these places, unless you get permission from that property owner, you can consume. Your rental property, if you're renting a home, you can't consume without consent of your landlord. So there's a lot of situations, especially with tourists, that they're going to come, they're going to purchase the product, and they're going to have to use it somewhere. If they don't have a safe location to use it, they're going to use it somewhere where they are not allowed to. I know there's also the option of purchasing edibles, and people can consume edibles safely. They don't have to be anywhere to use it. There's not the smell associated with it. But I think edibles is not necessarily something everyone enjoys consuming. I think flower is still the majority of the product that people want to consume. People want to smoke cannabis. So allowing on-site consumption. We're also recommending that as part of the retail plan, in addition to working closely with community members on public education and outreach, the retail locations, if they allow on-site consumption, work very closely with either Tahoe Transportation District, Uber, Lyft, a shuttle service, to make sure that people that are consuming have a safe way to get home if possible. You really can equate this to the plethora of bars and nightlife we have in our community. You can go to a bar, you can consume several drinks, you can go home, you can drive. There's going to be use no matter what. We just want to make sure that there's a safe, controlled environment to provide it in. So would anyone like to discuss in detail further the number of retail licenses we are recommending at 3? All right. Does anyone want to discuss in further detail requiring that these have a medical license attached to them for patient access? Would anyone like to discuss further the idea of prepackaged only? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Devin. I've got
Yeah.
a question. The M.
Yes.
All right. I've been reading about this a little bit. So you've got 2 types of licenses, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so this does not, the M license doesn't preclude you from having the other license.
No.
Okay. So
You can have both, yes.
So it's both licenses.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
And then would anyone like to discuss?
Yes, so just coming back to the M license, so all 3 retail licenses would require the medicinal and recreational cannabis access.
Correct. In theory, they could apply for only a medicinal license if they would like to. But in reality, and everywhere else we've seen in communities, most retail locations do have both licenses.
Okay.
Would anyone like to discuss in further detail the idea of prepackaged sales only, not allowing deli style? And then would anyone like to discuss in further detail allowing on-site consumption?
How are you going to mitigate the smell on on-site consumption?
That is a good question. I think there's a lot of what? Like cigar bars. Yeah, I think there could be, and I think maybe a recommendation that I don't know if we've done a lot of research into the filtration and HVAC systems, but I'm assuming there's some pretty specialized systems that are designed to filter out.
So many of the Colorado towns had excessive smell issues related to on-site consumption or near-site consumption. That's why they moved some of the locations out of the downtown areas. So I'm not sure I support that in any way, shape, or form, combined with you put a cannabis shop, for example, down by the Y, tourist drives over there, he's got to get his way back. The police have no way to do a verifiable legal test to see whether or not that person is overly intoxicated. The other thing, too, is with edibles and vape pens, where you're talking about the strength of pot nowadays, it's basically one-hit stuff for most people. So having a location where people can consume were they going to go in and take one hit, and that's what you need to have on-site consumption for? People can go out in their balcony and take a vape pen, and no one's going to smell anything. So I'm not sold on the on-site consumption, most importantly for the smell, and second of all, because I'm not sure how the police deal with somebody that decides to, take a toke down by the Y and try to drive back to the state line area. If we were in some place like Amsterdam, where people are walking from their hotels to the downtown area and walking back, it might make more sense. But with no restriction on where the locations are going to be within the town.
We've marked down that you want to discuss it further. We'll discuss it when we get to the discussion part. Thank you. And do you want to discuss it further, any specific point?
I guess just wanting to know what other communities are doing with on-site consumption versus remote locations, like a cigar bar. I mean, you can buy alcohol at a liquor store, but you can't drink it there. But you can drink it at a bar. So I'm just curious if other communities are doing something similar to that.
Gotcha.
And just to confirm, the one establishment that we do currently have in South Lake Tahoe does have on-site consumption?
Correct. That establishment does have on-site consumption.
I think maybe we can, in further discussion, if we can take a look at if there's been any issues with adjacent businesses or, safety concerns or issues around that. Maybe that would be relevant to this discussion.
Thank you. So now, where are these retail locations going to be located? The state has a regulation that requires a 600-foot buffer from schools, defined as, I think, 1 through 12, not including kindergarten. It's K through 12. And then any youth centers, youth facilities that are primarily used for youth that house 14 or more children. And local governments may also establish buffers for other sensitive uses. So our subcommittee, after hearing feedback from our presentation on 2 Tuesdays ago at the City Council, are recommending around schools K through 12 a 1,000-foot buffer. You can see it, I believe there's a map in your packets, and if not, there is a large map on the back wall there for the audience. And that is 1,000 feet around schools. We did not include the community college in this because after looking at the 1,000-foot buffer, it is all forested Forest Service land, so that buffer is basically moot at that point. It's also not, well, we could have done more. And then keeping that 600-foot youth facility for 14 or more children around that at 600 feet. I think from the ones I could recall in my mind, there's a lot of the youth facilities that are in residential neighborhoods, thinking about daycares, Montessori, preschool. So they're in places where pot or cannabis locations couldn't be anyways, but we want to keep that 600-foot buffer there. And then additional to the state requirements, we are also recommending a 150-foot buffer around the following: Lakeview Commons and parks with playgrounds. Obviously, parks with playgrounds is somewhere where kids tend to congregate and families are, and Lakeview Commons being sort of the centerpiece of outdoor entertainment and beach life in South Lake Tahoe. We wanted to keep a buffer around that. I know there's already a history of enforcement issues with both alcohol and cannabis at events like Live at Lakeview, so we want to make sure that it's at least somewhat away from there to avoid those conflicts. Churches with more than 100 parishioners, any California licensed drug and alcohol treatment center, so these are licensed centers, and then under the city's Tahoe Valley Area Plan, there is a designated health district for Barton Hospital, so we're recommending a 100-foot buffer, 150-foot buffer around the proposed border of that zone, and we are not recommending any zoning restrictions. So this would be, for example, the idea of industrial only or commercial only. We are not recommending any zoning restrictions. A retail location selling cannabis would be treated in the same zoning requirements of any other retail location. A manufacturing location would be treated like in any other manufacturing location. So there are no additional recommendations on top of that. So would anyone like to discuss further our buffers, the 1,000-foot, the 600-foot, the 150?
Yeah. Quick question, where does daycare fit into this?
That would be the youth facilities with 14 or more children.
Okay, thank you.
So in a lot of Colorado towns, they banned sale of cannabis after initially allowing it in downtown areas because people were double parking, running into the store, running out of the store.
So one of the things that we should be talking about is whether or not we should allow locations where there is no ample parking lots. Like where TWC is, there's a large parking lot over there. People can pull in, they can park, they can go into the store. It doesn't impede the public safety. A place like Ski Run where there's not ample parking, what Breckenridge experiences with people double parking, running in, running out, and it became a big public safety issue.
Yeah,
So-
I would defer to city staff and when they're doing permitting, looking at those parking calculations that are required of any property for parking minimums. I would maybe default to the city's on-the-book parking minimum regulations to avoid that. And then, so would anyone like to discuss specifically our 1,000-foot, 600-foot, and 150-foot buffers?
How does the law currently treat an existing business if, say, for instance, we were going to build a new school and there was an existing cannabis retail facility there?
If it's an existing cannabis facility and something else moves in that would make it within an existing buffer, that cannabis location is allowed to locate there because they were there first.
Okay. Legal non-conforming.
Yep. Great. And would anyone like to discuss further our recommendation of no zoning restrictions, i.e. industrial only?
I think I would, to Commissioner Palacio's point, if there's smoking on site, how that may impact the adjacent businesses. So I'm not sure exactly how that works into the zoning, but I think it's a consideration.
Okay. So there's the map again. There's a copy in the back, and there should be in your packet as well. Reds are schools, yellow is churches, green is parks, blue is the Barton Hospital District, and purple is the drug and alcohol treatment facilities. So on to the next license type, which would be delivery. So we are currently recommending that delivery be allowed, but it must be associated with a storefront. That's a brick and mortar retail location. The reasoning behind this is there are already a number of illegal delivery operations operating in the city of South Lake Tahoe. So by having them be required to be tied to a storefront, it adds a little more security on the enforcement side and being able to track where those delivery operations are based out of and where their product is kept. This is not saying that the retail location must operate that delivery service. They can contract with any delivery service they would like to operate out of their location, and we're not restricting the total number of delivery operations in town, just where they are tied to storefront only. If the council or planning commission has a great objection to allowing delivery for recreational use, we urge and recommend that at a minimum that delivery be kept for medicinal use to make sure that patients have access, especially those that are unable to drive or get a ride to a retail location. And then as a state regulation, this is what we're going with from the state. Delivery vehicles require a GPS tracker. They can carry a maximum value of $3,000 of product or cash at any time. And that delivery vehicle must only be used for delivery. You can't own your personal car, use it for delivery during the day, and then have it as your personal vehicle at night. It must be reserved solely for delivery of cannabis products. Would anyone like to discuss in greater detail delivery license type?
Does the state allow a delivery truck to load up with product and just drive around waiting for calls? Or does each call require them to go back to a dispensary, pick up the product, and then deliver it?
I am not sure.
Does the state allow a delivery truck to drive around with ample product so that it can deal with any call that may come in for a delivery? Or do they have to go back to the store to get each individual order and then deliver it?
The delivery vehicles can only carry the maximum amount allowable per patient. And so they could not, in theory, possess an infinite amount of cannabis. They can only possess what is allowable per patient.
Yeah, there's a lot of regulation that we can find out. Other than that point, is there anything else you'd like to discuss on that topic? Cultivation. So cultivation obviously is growing of cannabis. So our recommendations are, there's multiple recommendations within here. We recommend banning outdoor cultivation. The reason behind this is obviously in Tahoe with our short summers, and winters, I have enough trouble growing carrots and tomatoes in my garden, let alone a viable crop, in addition to water use, environmental regulations, and the scarcity of land around here. We really, and really not having an agricultural-based, city, banning outdoor cultivation, but allowing mixed light and indoor. So mixed light would be a greenhouse, and indoor would obviously be indoors with artificial lights. So allowing those two types of growing. And we would, next is the square footage or the size of growing that you allow cultivation. So we are recommending now to allow the cottage type license and the specialty cottage type license, which would allow growing of up to 5,000 square feet of cannabis, and that's based on the what's defined as the canopy, so how much space the actual plants take up. So you could have a 10,000 square foot facility, but you would be restricted to growing 5,000 square feet. This is one of the recommendations we would like to see the city re-examine in the future, 6 months from now, a year from now, if there's a number of successful cultivation businesses in town that are not violating any rules, upstanding, following all our rules, being successful, and they want to expand to the next level up, which would be small at 10,000 feet or medium to 22,000 square feet, we re-examine that. This is a baseline recommendation to make sure we're doing things right, but something that I think can allow for smart growth as our industry develops. We also recommend allowing nursery cultivation. So nursery cultivation is growing the plants from seeds or cloning them from an existing plant that are then being able to be sold to residents for their personal growth at home, which is currently allowed under state regulations up to 6 plants. So that allows people to buy the plants to grow for their personal consumption. We're recommending no stacking of permits, so someone can't get 5 grow permits for one location and all of a sudden have a 25,000 square foot grow. You have to, one address per cultivation permit, and we are recommending no cultivation and retail at the same address. So if you're in a location and you're in Unit A, you can't be selling and growing at the same time. This is to stop any potential diversion or the product, instead of when it's done growing, going through the normal process of the state regulations, testing, distribution, packaging, it ends up right in the front of the store or ends up going to the customers under the table. So this is Unit A. You could, in theory, have a retail location at Unit A of a building, and fully separated, you could have a cultivation location at Unit B. So we're really just trying to, under the state regulations, you can have a curtain between your retail and your grow and call it 2 separate areas of your business. So we're really trying to stop any chance for product to get siphoned off to the side back to the black market. And again, I think this is something, as businesses establish and grow in this community, should be revisited, especially based on size. So is there anyone that would like to discuss any of those points in further detail?
Question for the city attorney. If we decide to allow micro businesses, what's the maximum indoor grow allowed on a micro business?
10,000 square feet, but you are allowed to add and knock it down to 5,000.
City attorney?
Yep, that's correct.
10,000?
Devin, I see that you don't have any limit on the number of cottage or specially cottage licenses, so you would allow as many as people wanted to have?
Yes, we did not put a recommendation on capping any number of cultivation grows. If that's something you'd like to discuss further, we can add it to the discussion points.
I would, just for discussion,
Yep.
yes, please.
Can do.
A question, I assume, somewhere in here, all of these grows in retail all have to comply with city building codes and fire inspections?
Yes.
Particularly the grow?
Yes.
Okay.
So can a cottage business be in a residential neighborhood?
I would default to city staff, but I think it would be in either commercial or industrial use.
That we're not recommending any commercial uses in residential areas. It wouldn't otherwise be authorized by the city code or TRPA's code.
Yeah, to clarify, in order to obtain the M license, the cultivation, they would
M license does not apply to the cultivation, only the retail.
Okay, so these could effectively not be within the 1,000-foot buffer? for-
No, the buffers only apply to retail locations. Yep. Yeah, and I would assume that the city would permit these as commercial operations, so they would be zoned commercial. But I don't want to speak for the planning department.
It would be useful to know how other cities have, from a planning perspective, zoned cultivation. I know the city of San Francisco allows it, for instance, and the smell is actually an issue, and so the permitting process actually requires code on how they handle that. So if we could discuss
Yeah, we
that
can
in
dig
detail,
into
that'd be great.
All right, so next on to manufacturing. So under manufacturing, there are a number of different license types, four, that apply here. We are recommending to allow two types of manufacturing licenses. The first is type N, and the second is type P. So type N is producing edible products or topical products using THC, CBD, but does not include on-site extraction of those products. You can also package and label cannabis products on that licensed premises. This is if you wanted to start an edible brownie company or lollipops or rubs or lotions or ailments. So this is making products with most likely extracted THC. So taking the flower, they do the extraction process, you have a concentrated product that comes out of it, you then make brownies or candy or oils or rubs out of that. So we're recommending that. We are not recommending the extraction at this time. And then type P is manufacturers that engage in packaging or labeling of cannabis products. So this is a type of license you would get if you wanted to brand a product and package it as Tahoe cannabis or put a lake on it because that sells in this town. So those two types we are recommending. We are not recommending type 6, which is non-volatile extraction, or type 7, which is volatile extraction. So non-volatile extraction is using things like CO2, ice, and water to extract the THC particles out of the flower. Type 7 volatile is using things like butane to do that. We are recommending not allowing each of these initially, but reevaluating allowing type 6 non-volatile in the future. One of the reasons we're not recommending these is because of the unknown added burden on enforcement and the police department. Some of the regulations around what you need to have in your building, especially for the volatile extraction, such as blast-proof doors, fire suppression systems, is really just a lot for us to take on at this time. So is there anyone that would like to discuss any of the four license types in more detail?
So if I understand you correctly, then all extracted product would have to come from out of the area in order to produce edibles in the area?
Yes, so at the time, if someone wanted to start a, say, brownie company, they would have to purchase the input into that brownie from someone else that's licensed, yes, outside of the area to produce that product.
Which drives the price of the local product up, right?
In theory, I'm not exactly sure. Any of the other license types? All right, so next is distribution. So distribution, under state regulations, a distributor receives products from cultivators and manufacturers, so from growers and the people making brownies, and sells and distributes to retail locations for sale to the public. They're also responsible for the tax collection, which goes to the state. There is no burden on the local jurisdiction for tax collection. And we are recommending to allow that distribution license, which is basically just the ability to transport product from the growers and the makers of the product to the sellers of the product to the testing laboratories. We're also recommending allowing a distributor transport license, which allows manufacturers and cultivators to deliver their product to distribution facilities. So if I'm making brownies at a location that I want to sell, I don't want to be a distributor, I can drive that product to someone that is a distributor to then sell on the market. So this allows local product that's being manufactured and grown to be picked up and sold and moved around in town for sale. Does anyone like to discuss distribution license type more? Testing facilities. So we are recommending to allow testing facilities under state regulations. Again, there are very, very strict regulations around testing, what testing facilities may or may not be. We think allowing testing facilities is a good thing because product grown up here has a local convenient way to get tested, and we are not recommending any additional restrictions on testing facilities other than the state's. Would anyone like to discuss testing facilities in greater detail?
Would all three of the outlets use the same testing facility here in town?
Not necessarily. If a testing facility was to open, they'd be competing for everyone's business like anyone else. I'm sure a number of people may choose to still ship it down the hill to get tested at other facilities.
I have a question regarding the minutes from the February 6th meeting on this. It was discussed that all product be tested by January 1st, 2018. Can you tell us a little bit about what that date means, seeing that it's already happened?
Yeah, so that was just the state's regulation. Once cannabis was legal and they, at the beginning of the year, January 1st, were starting to issue retail licenses, that's when the requirement that all product being sold from there on out would be tested. And then the last license type, I think the last license type, is temporary events. So this is something you would imagine where you go and either purchase or consume cannabis at an outdoor event. That currently for us is null under current state regulations. Right now, to have a temporary event, you need to do it on licensed or zoned county fairgrounds, which we do not currently have in the city limits. There are several bills at the state right now to look at expanding and changing the regulations around temporary events. However, those aren't law yet, so we are recommending under current state regulations that the city of South Lake Tahoe default to state regulations because they really do not apply to us at this time. Obviously, as things change, we'll want to re-examine that. So I'll throw it out there, but does anyone want to discuss temporary events in additional detail? So now, the last license type is the micro-business license. And that is a business that engages in at least 3 of the 4 activities below: cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, which is different from a full distribution license. It's self-distribution only, so you can only distribute the products you grow, produce, and make, and retail sale. So right now, we are not allowing a micro-business license type. Again, something that I think should be re-examined in the future in 1 year. This does not prevent anyone wanting to do business from applying and getting a cultivation license, a distribution license, a retail license, and those type NMP licenses. The reasons we are not allowing a micro-business is because a micro-business is vertically integrated. You really do step A to step Z. You grow it, you package it, you manufacture it, you distribute it, you sell it. And that really offers a lot of chances for enforcement issues, for people to divert product from the side. There's also a revenue generation implication. In an individual license type situation, you collect revenue on each of those license types. Under a micro business, you only collect revenue on the whole. So instead of collecting some on the cultivation, some on the manufacturing, some on the distribution, you just collect it on the whole. And as Mr. Sass brought up, the square footage. So under micro business, you're allowed to cultivate up to 10,000 square feet, and our current recommendation is 5,000 square feet. So again, the cultivation and manufacturing are the reasons we're not recommending it at the time. Would anyone like to discuss in further detail the micro business license type?
Yeah, I'd like to mix this up a little. Liz, can you tell me why you would support not having a micro business in town?
I support micro business.
So you do support a micro business?
Yeah.
Okay. I support a micro business too. I really, in fact.
I'll add it to the list
we
for
can
further
discuss.
discussion. So how does this structure roll out? We are recommending what we would call a pilot program through development agreements. So the development agreements are agreements you enter into with people wanting to obtain licenses. I'll go through that process in a little bit. And that allows us to immediately work on these businesses, start licensing these business types. It allows us control over who's moving in. There could be a rigorous process of who gets selected, determined by city council and city staff. That pilot would allow us to test our regulations, test enforcement, see where we're going, get a ballpark guesstimate on potential revenue if the tax rate we're recommending is too high, if it's too low. That would then sunset into a full ordinance, which would, the development agreement, pilot, and the full ordinance would all follow the same regulations we just laid out. It would just sunset into a full ordinance on the city's books, and then lead to a ballot initiative with a tax attached to it. Again, it would allow for immediate revenue sharing and getting people licensed. It would make sure we are at the fastest pace possible providing patient access, and it would allow us a period of time while these agreements are in place to adjust our regulations as needed to make this fit best for our community. In your packets, there was several development agreement examples included. I really like the one from Hayward, which included scoring and requirements very similar to an RFP process. We also recommend that anyone wanting a license type has no non-marijuana related felonies. We include a community benefits package that's working with the community around education, enforcement, prevention. Again, community support, being part of the community, not just taking from it. And we really, really emphasize that in this selection process, local businesses and entrepreneurs are favored, and we really want to support the locals in our community. We don't want this to become a town run over with the McDonald's of the cannabis industry. Really putting that forward and supporting local businesses and entrepreneurs. Again, some examples included in your packet were West Sacramento, Desert Hot Springs, and Hayward. And recommended revenue generation. So you really want to start at a low rate over time. The state currently has a 15% excise tax on the sale of cannabis, and including cannabis taxes on cultivation. There's also sales tax, but all of that, the city directly gets 1% of the sales tax. Everything else goes to the state that we can then, they divvy out to local jurisdictions. But you don't want to set a tax that's too high to encourage the illicit market. You want to keep a low tax rate so your prices are competitive and people aren't just defaulting back to the black market. And then our recommendation is starting out at a minimum of 3.5% of gross receipts for those development agreements. And that would give us a ballpark on how much revenue we can expect and more evidence-based decision-making if a tax initiative goes forward. So it seems like, Jason, you would like to discuss this further?
I had something on slide 24. It has no non-marijuana felonies for all employees management.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that just be felonies? Because the way it's worded means you could have a marijuana-related felony.
Yes, you want to say that?
State law has, under Prop 64, you can have any marijuana-related felony expunged from your record, and many cities are just mass expunging those records. It's part of Prop 64, and that's the state regulation on it. So it limits and says that you can't have a felony except for a non-marijuana. Why? Because 64 says you can have a marijuana-related felony expunged by law. It's just a process you have to go through, and like I said,
so would anyone like to discuss this, the idea of the 3.5 gross receipts? Again, I think a lot of the steps we're outlining in the development agreements aren't for our ordinance or this decision tonight to be made. That's something city staff can develop. They know a lot more about development agreement process than our subcommittee does. But we want to make sure that, it's clear that there is some local revenue generation. Finally, the local support program. So again, we've been talking a lot about where this local support revenue generation should go. And we are recommending a number of things. We are not putting any percentages on these yet, but we really think it should go towards, obviously, enforcement to support not only the local police department, but the school. I know the school district has expressed the need for additional safety resource officers on both the high school and middle school campus. So we would have resources for that. Today, we already have a problem with cannabis on our school campuses, unfortunately, but we don't have the local resources to adequately deal with this. This would give us an avenue to deal with that. If we don't do anything, we don't have that avenue. We don't have those resources. Education and outreach, prevention and treatment, and data collection. So this would all be determined by community input and committee recommendations. And the last piece, data collection, is obviously we need to know what effects this is having on the community. We have some rough data, depending on the source. It may or may not be accurate on use, DUIs, how many children are into it, when they're using. but we need to dedicate some funds for some real data usage to establish a new baseline behind the effects it's having on our community to know whether it's getting worse, if it's lessening, but we need hard, solid, reliable numbers to base that on. So then the next steps, obviously we're meeting tonight. We're going to be presenting to hopefully the Planning Commission in the future, and then the City Council for final recommendations and adoption. But those are my steps. I believe Chief Medston, you wanted to take over to have the different department heads discuss clarifying questions, sorry.
I'm going to just correct a couple statements that were made also. Great report, but there are a couple of inaccuracies. Mr. Middlebrook stated that the state-imposed buffers only apply to retailers. That's not accurate. They apply to every license issued under the state laws. So that would be cultivation, testing, manufacturing. It was also stated that the A&M sub-licenses apply, I think you said they apply only to retailers, not to cultivators. A&M licenses apply to every single license type with the exception of testing laboratories. So the ultimate ordinance that the city adopts will need to specify whether A&M licenses are authorized for each different license type that's authorized under the ordinance. And then I wanted to clarify with respect to the delivery question, I gave you a partial answer. The rest of the answer is that in addition to only carrying the amount authorized, allowable for each patient, a single delivery operator may only carry up to $3,000 worth of product at any given time.
And while we're on delivery, if the immediate need is medicine for patients within town, what are the restrictions or abilities of the city to enter into a development rights agreement with a storefront located outside of the city of South Lake Tahoe that is able to deliver product within the city of South Lake Tahoe?
Yes, so cities are dealing with this in different ways. Some cities only require a retailer license, which is the license type required for a delivery operator, only require that a license be obtained if the delivery operation is based in that jurisdiction. Some cities are authorizing deliveries to come into their jurisdiction from an outside location. A city cannot prohibit the movement of cannabis through its jurisdiction through delivery purposes, but you can impose a regulation that would restrict the actual delivery within your jurisdiction.
And could the city enter into a development rights agreement with a Nevada-based retail operation who was within the basin?
No, because you still cannot transport cannabis across state lines.
Just a question of clarification also, how does track and trace play into this?
Into delivery? So the track and trace program, the track and trace system tracks the cannabis until the point of sale. So once the cannabis is delivered, the retailer, who is the deliverer, tracks using the system that the cannabis that has come from the cultivator through the distributor, or to the tester, to the distributor, to the retailer, that it has been sold and is no longer product of the retailer.
Nira, back to Austin's question about the delivery. You're referring to patients, but I think, is the recommendation that delivery would be available for recreational and medicinal cannabis?
I don't know what their recommendation is.
You're done?
Our recommendations are to allow delivery for both recreational and medicinal. The caveat was if the direction of the council is to not allow deliveries for whatever reason it be, that the consideration remain in place for medicinal use in medical patients.
Okay, thank you. So I guess the question goes back to, can you, if you're not carrying it per patient prescription or order, can you carry $3,000 worth of cannabis? It's like an ice cream truck. You load up and you go out until you get the orders, or until you're selling it, and then you come back and restock and go, if it's recreational. I think is more, yeah.
You mean, can you drive around town waiting for an order to come in?
I think that's
and yes, that would, you don't have to depart from the retail facility or from the non-storefront delivery operation, fixed delivery operation facility with an order in place. And my understanding is that the industry is developing or has developed some sort of Uber-type on-call purchasing where drivers can find out that they're, you have to ask an industry expert about that.
Yeah, I got a question. First of all, I want to clarify something. We told the committee at the beginning, the middle, and the end, these are recommendations to the council. Council may modify them, change them at any time at our discretion. But the question I have, and we discussed, and I'm not sure what the committee finally decided, but I had asked for a path back process. And the path back process would be setting a baseline in the community, and then we would look at number of DUIs once the CHP establishes the criteria they're going to use, the number through the school district if they see a large increase of underage usage, or the hospital saw an increase in ER visits due to marijuana. And the reason for the path back, maybe we would need to take a look at better education if we see these numbers going high through the school, maybe through the cannabis distributors, and maybe tighten the law a little bit somewhere. But I think a path back is something we really need to take a hard look at.
Yes, thank you for bringing up that point. I was starting to run out on my clock, so I expedited the last few slides. I don't think that's something we're recommending a path back be put directly into the ordinance, but we are fully supportive of the path back idea. Under the local support program that I could have gone into more detail on, that's really what that data collection piece is collecting that data around the schools, the DUI, the usage, and under enforcement, establishing those metrics with recommendations from community input and this committee's recommendations on those metrics and measures. We're just not recommending that that be each one of those specific points be written into the ordinance. That's something that could be done through the development agreement process.
We can discuss that.
Mayor David, looking at the next steps here, it says council provide direction to staff tonight. Present final recommendation by March 8th, bring final recommendations March to May. I'm really interested in hearing from people that are proposing to open a business or currently do have a business with regard to things like the micro license and the cost of product, and I'm not sure where on the agenda that gets fit in, but I would certainly like to hear from people like Mr. Bass and some of the other, Mr. Feshkins and other people that have some background.
Well, first of all, these are just recommendations from the group, so the council can certainly decide on what direction they want to give at the end of this meeting. And also, we are going to, as soon as we finish these more formal presentations, we're going to open it up to public comment. So with your recommendations, maybe some of these people will come up and public comment on some of the things that you're interested in. Does that answer your question?
I think it may make sense to group all of the people that are either operating currently a cannabis business or proposing or have a business plan, and let them all talk at one time so we could get those issues about micro businesses and extraction out into the forefront rather than mix it in with everything, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I'm not sure they want to tell me you're using an illegal business right now, would you?
They're not doing, it's not saying they're illegal.
Okay.
I'm sure Mr. Bass and Mr. Feshkins would be happy to.
We'll move forward with your having voice that you would like to hear from some of those, for sure. I think, Devin, now we're going to we're going to let department heads give some information. And Chief Euler, would you be kind enough to share some thoughts with us?
Thank you, Mayor, Honorable Council, and Planning Commission. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk today. I'd like to start by recognizing that the council has a difficult decision before it. You have a difficult balancing act between the risk to the community and the community needs. The key differences in recommendations that I see coming forward or that I recommend is what I would characterize as 1, retail, medicinal, and recreational facility instead of 3. it located in the industrial area instead of all over town, a quantity of other types limited to the one retail initially and maybe one testing facility instead of 12 additional license types. And the key difference there is each time you add license types and each time you add profiles for us to work, that represents increases in oversight, that represents increases in enforcement responsibilities, that represents increases in the potential for diversion in the community, all of which are serious concerns moving forward. The subcommittee has recommended 3.5% as it relates to the tax revenue, and I understand the rationale behind that. Most cities in California are going for between 8 and 12%. I would recommend 10%. At 3.5%, $5 million gross would generate $525,000. Something that staff and the subcommittee agree on has to do with the enforcement campaigns that are necessary moving forward. Has to do with the need to educate our community, needs as it relates to treatment programs and prevention programs. $525,000 is not enough. At 10%, that would be $1.5 million. And that's closer to what would be needed just to start moving forward. The subcommittee's principles include take it slow, allowing for locally healthy and responsible and regulated industry, and recognizing that it's easier to expand than it is to contract this model. I would submit to you that the subcommittee's recommendations represent a fully developed marijuana industry in South Lake Tahoe. When you talk about 12 different license types and 3 recreational and medicinal facilities as representing retail, if there were just 3 of each license type, plus the 3 retail establishments, that represents 39 marijuana businesses in our community. I don't have the resources, and I don't think the state has the resources to deal with that effectively. Last time I checked with Lori Ajax, she had 35 total employees. That's to cover the entire state of California. I do not expect them to be coming up to South Lake Tahoe and helping out with illegal or illicit marijuana industries that pop up in our community, and I don't think that they're going to be that effective initially with 39 potential businesses operating in our community. It's the police department that has to deal with difficult situations that we see in the field. Police officers of the South Lake Tahoe Police Department responded to a search warrant. A 2-year-old had access to many dozens of marijuana plants growing underneath the child's room. Gases and chemicals were leaching into the room, and the child ultimately tested positive for marijuana. In another case, we had a middle school child who showed up to school and was constantly smelling of marijuana coming to school. When we responded to the parents, we find that the father was obviously high. He was angry that we involved Child Protective Services, and he said that he uses his child's urine to help him get a job, which demonstrated to him, for him, that that was being a responsible parent. Another officer told me about a situation where a parent was blowing smoke into a baby's face to stop it from crying. I think you'll be hearing from hospital officials and school officials a little later today and talk to you a little bit more about the impacts that we're seeing today in our schools and today in our hospitals. The issues that are before you are very serious. There are still many unknowns in the marijuana industry as it continues to unfold in California. In November of 2016, I addressed the council, and during that time, I talked about many of these unknowns. Again, in August of 2017, I talked to you about many of the unknowns, the unknown risks that are facing California as a whole and our community specifically. These unknowns exist today just like they did then. There have not been a lot of answers coming forward from the state officials regulating marijuana There have not been additional data coming forward out of the studies out of University of California, San Diego. There has not been new information with regard to DUI enforcement from California Highway Patrol. These many unknowns still exist and represent a risk to our community. Not to mention the potential for 39 businesses to be strewn about off of Highway 50 through our city and potentially impacting our family-friendly recreational tourism economy. I think that before you today, it's really a question of need. I have heard many years' worth of need being demonstrated before our city council. We have heard people standing up at the podium and talking about access to medicine. We have heard people who are embracing the recreational marijuana businesses as we move forward in California. I'm not adverse to that, and I think that a recommendation to provide one retail, medicinal, and recreational facility satisfies the urgent need before the City Council and before this Planning Commission as it exists today. The other types of marijuana industry and businesses that are being presented and recommended by this subcommittee represent an opportunity for people to make money. That's what this is about. It's not about satisfying the needs of this community. The additional business profile in this community represents a huge enforcement responsibility, a huge oversight responsibility for this city, and I do not believe we're ready for that. I suggest to you that going slow, which is one of the subcommittee's principles, means starting with one. You've heard Mr. Middlebrook talk about 12 different license types, and even expanding beyond that. He's talked to you about the potential of expanding into the micro-business profile and expanding from 5,000 feet to 10,000 feet grow area. What needs are actually met for our community as it relates to growing 10,000 square feet, unlimited number of them in our community? I don't think that all the people that have stood before the City Council for years needs are represented in the need to make money. This industry represents other problems for our community, and I'll defer those issues as it relates to hospital and schools later in the program. Thank you.
Chief, one clarifying question. How'd you get to 39?
If there were 3 of each of the 12 license types that are not represented by retail, that's 36 plus, so there's 12 license types that are being recommended by the subcommittee. So if there were 3 of each type, and then just submitting that that's a possibility, and then if there were 3 retail establishments, as the subcommittee recommends, that's 36 plus 3, so a total of 39. It could be more than that. There's essentially an unlimited number available according to the subcommittee recommendations.
So just a clarification, it's my understanding that the subcommittee is not recommending anything, it's only the working group that's making the recommendations.
Well, it's the members of the, I'm not recognizing the distinction, but yes, the working group has made the recommendations. The subcommittee council members have not been voting, nor have I, nor have other city staff members. The city attorney has not been a voting member as it relates to this group of individuals that have been assembled to digest this issue.
This is another point of clarification. Is it true that the working group did a thumbs up?
Mike.
Yeah, it's not like that.
That means you're done.
Well, yours is
So it's my understanding that the working group who's making the recommendations, is it accurate you did a thumbs up or thumbs down vote on everything? Yes. So when I asked Liz the question about the micro business and she said she supports it, that means you gave a thumbs up because you went with the majority?
So I would clarify that we did a consensus-based process. We did do a thumbs up, thumbs down vote on each of our recommendations. Not every single vote ended up in full 100% yes or 100% no. If the vote did not have 100% in one direction, the person that was the person or people that were the dissenting opinion for that recommendation were asked if they can live with that recommendation. There were some items that one or two people did not agree with the rest of the group, but could not live with that recommendation. So we continued discussing it until we could reach a point where everyone, even if they didn't agree with the final recommendation, and there's recommendations in here I don't personally agree with, but as part of the process and the group's thinking, I am more than comfortable standing behind every single recommendation we have made. And just to clarify on the chief's comments, the chief was in the room during every meeting, and we appreciated and really used him as a resource on that enforcement side, and a lot of these considerations and a lot of the additional recommendations around operating procedures we made in not in concession to the chief, but we made because of the chief's input and his expertise as a law enforcement professional. So I don't want you to get the impression that our group completely deviated from any strong logical recommendation put forward by the chief on what it would take him and what resources he would need to uphold the new regulations. I would also like to clarify, Chief, you mentioned a 10% tax. In our proposals, it's a 3% on gross revenue. So that's not just sales tax, that's all the revenue, gross receipts, so that's all the receipts of the business, not just the taxable sales of the businesses. And I did mark down that Mrs. David wanted to discuss more the number of cultivation sites total. So I think a cap on the number of any of those license type is definitely still on the table. And nowhere have we discussed a 39 number or wanting a minimum number of each license type.
Thank you for clarifying that. I would like to add a couple more thoughts as it relates to some of those clarifying points. I would be remiss to suggest that I wasn't included. I was included, and I appreciated the subcommittees recognizing and giving me the opportunity to address the group and to provide reasons for various restrictions that might be useful moving forward. And I'm not suggesting that for this community, the model that is being presented by the subcommittee is completely wrong. What I'm submitting to you is that I see that as a fully developed model, and we should go very slowly. One of the things that I have been very clear with the City Council back in August when I talked about the path back, and in those times since, I have been in conversations with both the school and the hospitals, and we really need to develop a broad array of measures and data points that we can put our finger on the pulse of this community, and we can understand on a quarter-by-quarter basis what kind of impacts marijuana is having in our community. Right now, today, we do not have that baseline that we need.
Right.
And that's why I think we need to go slow. We take the time. We go with the one retail. It satisfies the immediate need. I have been there and I've felt the pressures that have been put on the City Council by person after person after person going up and speaking to them about medicinal needs in this community. And I'm not adverse to any of that. The issue that I see is that takes care of the immediate needs. Let's wait until the hospitals and the schools and the police department can get a good agreed on set of data, and we can look at that over a period of multiple years if necessary, until we have a good feel and a good understanding that the finger is on the pulse. We know if it's getting better. Maybe all the efforts that the state is undertaking with regard to the 15% tax, maybe those grants come forward, and maybe there's a great push as it relates to prevention and treatment and other kinds of issues that this community faces that will mean that it's getting better as opposed to getting worse. Right now, I'm hearing some alarming things. When I hear about our school resource officer talking to a 12-year-old who is peddling marijuana to 12 other students, that's alarming. And I think that we need to understand that right now we are at that point in time where we're sort of struggling with marijuana in this community, and to go further down that road as opposed to carefully going down that road, I think it would be irresponsible to go that far that fast.
Thank you, Chief. We're going to keep going because this is a great conversation, but if anyone feels the need that you need a break, we're going to understand if you need to walk out, use the restroom or whatever. And so I think that's a good segue. I don't know if there's any other department heads within the city that would like to speak. I would like to segue Yes, we'll hear Kevin, and then segue to hearing some of the organizations you mentioned, Chief, if there's someone here from the hospital that's going to be speaking. And
Just one more point before we transition. I just want to make sure that gets captured in the meeting minutes and on the record. From my recollection and the notes we were taking for topics that really are the hot button, really need more discussion, and I think potentially tonight if possible, or very soon in the future, the online advertising Mr. Sass brought up, the path back option, what details would go into that, on-site consumption, the micro business license type specifically related to extraction and the 10,000 square feet of cultivation, a cap on the number of cultivation grows, and I think maybe a wider discussion on the cap of all license types if applicable, the manufacturing and not allowing the extraction and the idea of them having to bring in the concentrates from outside the area. I think those are real top ones. I think some other smaller issues that deserve discussion, but maybe as part of the development agreement process, licensing, permit requirements, the 21 versus 26 for employees due to developing brain, the background checks being a disproportionate against people of color, a notice for the PD before obtaining surveillance, potential Fourth Amendment right issues, the other communities about on-site consumption outside of just retail locations, similar to liquor stores like Mr. Collin brought up. Multiple people brought up the idea or the issue with smell from both cultivation, use, and retail. So I just wanted to make sure that those were captured.
thank you very much. And you know, this tonight is exactly what we're doing. We're getting topics. This obviously will be a discussion at many council meetings. We'll take that information back to have discussion, but I want to make sure that tonight we have, this is a workshop where I want to have the opportunity for some of our organizations for us to ask clarifying questions. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of in-depth discussion. And I appreciate that we have narrowed down to some of our most important topics.
And I just
So-
want to say this is when we want public input.
Right, this is our public hearing. And so, Mr. Fabino, please.
So, Madam Mayor, members of the council, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, subcommittee, members of the audience, Kevin Fabino, Director of Development Services. I may be jumping a little bit ahead because I want to throw out some detail stuff to think about as we're moving forward. I absolutely agree with the police chief, Brian Euler's comments about we really need a full model. And I think from planning side of it, I absolutely agree. So I think the key to the zoning questions that will come up, I heard the comment earlier, well, we're just going to kind of leave all the development standards as they are. But the key to that conversation is really how you define this particular use. So for example, there was a comment about parking, and I jotted down just a couple quick numbers to illustrate how important it is to be very fine-tuned in the discussion as we go forward. So for example, if you presume that a dispensary behaved like a restaurant, go in, sit down for a couple minutes, maybe half an hour, you go out. You go in, you shop, you go out. That parking standard on a 10,000 square foot building would require 66 spaces. If you defined it as a general merchandise, 7-Eleven-ish, then you'd only need 33. And if we put it in the industrial and identify it as general industrial use, you'd only need 25. You may reflect, months ago, we had a conversation about arcs and radiuses, and if it touches 1 foot inside the arc, is it in, is it out? Which is a great, again, reflect on some of those things that we've talked about, because on Tahoe Lane, there is a mental health service provider, and what does that 150 look like if you were to go to what would be to the east? So again, I think for us on the planning side, how that conversation gets shaped, it's going to have to be more than just as the zoning ordinance is today. Because to be quite honest, from my perspective, it won't work It's got to think about all of these things and how does it line up with the existing code so it will actually work. The other comment I wanted to make was with respect to the development agreement. Great concept, understand it, have looked through it. I think the key to our success, as we learned today, is going to be what are those evaluation criteria? And they have to be very, very clear and very, very succinct, no ambiguities, so that everybody going into that process is going to know exactly what that rubric is, and when we come out at the other end, who's 1, 2, 3, whatever the number is allowed. I think the other thing is, and I just share this experience because I've been in another community that had a similar situation, where they went out for tax, they generate the tax passed, and then they wanted to provide to nonprofit, non-governmental agencies some of the proceeds of those taxes. You might want to ask the city attorney to look into that. We've had just a brief conversation about how do you actually move money that's collected as a sales tax to those services providers. My comments are maybe a little premature because I know this is a little bit higher level conversation, but I throw it out because as you're thinking through the comments you're hearing, maybe this will help kind of point us a little bit in that direction of some detail that is going to have to be contemplated in whatever ends up, whether it be development agreements and or what you're going to look for as the eventual ordinance. Our interest, again, is that this is the body that potentially could be reviewing development agreements, but this could also be the body that would be initiating revocation should something along those lines unfortunately occur, in which revocation is the appropriate process to follow. So those are really the comments that I'm not sure that they're completely pertinent, but they're what we're going to be looking at. And as you hear the public testimony and start thinking about how this is going to line itself out, these are things that, at least from a purely land use perspective, we're going to be thinking about to try to help get everybody to where they want to be. And I can answer any questions you might have.
Well, kind of a question. I think you bring up the chicken and the egg, what we need first before we make other decisions. So I just hope that the Planning Commission and that you will be a part of this process early in telling us as a council if before you make a decision about X, Y, and Z, we believe you first need to consider some of the things that you've mentioned. So I thank you for that input. Going forward, what I'd like to do, Chief Euler mentioned schools and hospital. I believe there might be someone here from either one of those organizations. And if so, Dr. Tarwater, please come forward. And if you'd like to address us from the podium, that would be awesome. We want to get to public comments, so I'm just going to ask that that any organization that's coming up and speaking on behalf of an organization, limit your comments to 5 minutes. When we go to individuals, we're going to ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. And I don't know if we have a timer. Ms. Alessi, are you going to time on your? Oh, well. Nice.
I scared him away. I didn't get up there yet.
Yeah, we'll take just a very, very, very short 5-minute break. Thanks, guys. Now you can all get up if you want to. Dr. Tarwater, don't take this advantage to go home.
I think so. He was texting me quite a bit.
Okay.
Do you want me to go out?
Yeah, please, because I had heard yesterday it was going to be Dr. Earl, but that he was on call. So if you will, then I'll personally invite him. Okay. Yeah.
Let's try to pull it back together pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Lose momentum.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I realize now what you were asking me about delivery and track and trace. I don't think I probably answered what you wanted.
Yeah, I
Do you
didn't
want
think
me
so
to
either, but,
clarify?
well, I thought that that would be a control piece. And I just wanted to know if it was indeed, because we've kind of been sold that bill of goods.
No, you're right. Well, I think what you were getting at is that the purchase
Right,
has to
has
be
to
made
be-
to the facility for the track and trace.
And
Then
when
the
they're
rest of what I
driving,
said
the
is the rest.
invoice with the stuff is together.
Yep.
You're not driving around like an ice cream truck, which
No,
is,
however, right. However, they can place it to the facility and then
radio it.
and then my understanding.
This is your 1-minute call. We'll reconvene in about 1 minute.
9 minutes?
One.
One person speaking, that's it.
You're good.
Have the person that has that green.
I think you need the lady with the butterfly. What's up, Tom? You mean Carol?
That was so funny.
She's a
to
character.
Carol.
Good, how you doing?
I said that to her too. I just gave her a hug
This is
over
so
there.
great.
Thanks
So
for bringing the
thoughtful.
flag.
So thoughtful.
So are we giving our standard 3 minutes?
5 for an organization. So
All
I'm
right,
gonna
and you're
give
gonna make that
Dr.
a-
Tarwater and Martin
Okay.
Hunt. And then 3. And,
Okay.
And what, are you going to just hold up your hand? Or?
No, I have my phone.
Yeah.
I'll hear it. Yeah.
Oh, they'll hear it.
I'll hear it.
Okay, if everybody can take a seat, we're going to get back to our meeting because eventually this tired city council wants to go home at some point.
Why?
Dr. Orr is here from Barton, and Troy Matthews wants to speak on behalf of somebody that, no, they're ready. They have the cannabis subcommittee, I guess.
Okay. Dr. Tarwater, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. I'm sure as soon as you start speaking, everyone will be dead silent.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure being here.
Yes.
Council members.
And can I, yes, and you may have 5 minutes. Again, you'll hear a timer. So if you're still speaking, thank you.
Okay. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on Lake Tahoe Unified School District. We have 3,906 students. 61.9% of the students are low income, which is 2,410 students. We have 58.3% that are free and reduced lunch, which is 2,279 students. We have 241 students that are homeless at this present time, which is 6%. We have 35 students that are foster home that flip over quite frequently. We have ELD, English as a second language students. We have 23%, which is approximately 938 students. And our Hispanic minority represents 42% of the district, which is approximately 1,660 students. This year, we have focused a lot on trying to provide extra support in the area of nursing. We're recognized by the state of California as the only district that has 5 nurses out of 6 schools. Why did we do that? We wanted attendance. We wanted to comfort the parents. When you have such a high poverty level, you got to get to the homes, and that's what we're doing. 3 of our elementary schools had 96%, and then the other 3 had 93.4%. Also, we've added counseling. Counseling is critical in this day and age. We have 4 counselors at the high school, 1 wraparound, and 1 intervention. We have 1 at the Mount Talac Continuation School, and we have 3 at the middle school. Why do we need so many? Well, high school last year we had 840 interventions. We had 54 students that were on suicide watch that we met with every day. In the middle school, we had 1,149 interventions, and we had 14 on the suicide watch. Has the time changed? Yes. What do I need from you? Just what was reported in terms of local support. We have an SRO and 3 security at the high school. As you know, with what's happening in the world today, safety and security is taking a lot of our resources also. We will be fencing in, looking at entry points, and it's sad to say that we have to do this. At the middle school, we would love to have an SRO because we need enforcement. These are underage kids. And when student says to a new student coming in, hey, the norm in this school is everybody smokes weed. These are kids that are under 21. We know in terms of being high in class, you're not engaged. We know, for example, in terms of brain development, we're looking at 25, 26. What are we doing to our youth? What I'm asking is
Three things. One, education. We'll start at the kindergarten level. We'll tie nutrition and physical activities and alcohol and drug abuse all the way up through high school. Piece by piece as we work. So kids in our prevention program campaign will be making healthy choices. They got to be able to make healthy choices, and they only have one body. Please take care of it. The other part is in enforcement, what we said, where we need an SRO officer. And the third one is we need help in terms of a school social worker. We need to get to the families, but we got to start at the elementary level. That's where research shows that the K1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, we can change how they feel about themselves, how they deal with the drugs. Right now, I'm telling you right now, weed is seen as okay because of the medical piece that started, now it's in the recreational. They're underage. I'm asking you to support the local control. We need 1.5%, or about $75,000 per retailer. The current retailer right now grosses $5 million. We're only asking $75,000 a retailer. What can that buy us? It can buy us 2 social workers and an SRO officer for 1.5%. So please support the kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tarwater. I'd like to invite up Dr. Orr, who I believe is here to speak on behalf of Barton Hospital. Again, Dr. Orr, if you'd like to have up to 5 minutes. That
Yeah,
would be
I won't take up that much time. I know there's a lot of questions that want to be addressed this evening by a number of people here. But just from the perspective of Barton Health, I think we have concern over 2 population groups, 2 patient groups. First being the adolescents and the young adults. As you know, they're not known for moderation in their use of substances. Alcohol could be an example. Just because it's illegal for use under age 21 doesn't mean that it's not used, and anybody wants to, take a tour of the ER on a weekend can kind of prove that. But what marijuana has been shown in those individuals their brain is still developing, that's been mentioned a few times tonight, the CDC has studied this, and they feel that learning, problem solving, memory are all impaired, not just when you're under the influence at that time with marijuana, but throughout the day, and it affects them over years, and when their use stops, their cognitive functions don't always rebound. Also, people in that age range who use regularly are more at risk for the mental health disorders of anxiety, depression, psychosis. A study I've read, and most of these can be debated one way or another, but that there can be a 6-fold increase in the lifetime diagnosis of schizophrenia in individuals who have used substantially while they were, at the young age. So we worry about the adolescents, as Dr. Tarwater mentioned. It is, already in a fair amount of use in the community, and if you increase the access, to the general public, you're probably going to have increased use of the adolescents as well. And the second population that, we're most concerned about are going to be, it's the unborn child with the pregnant mother who's using, and that those children have been studied and have been found to have some increase in behavioral problems by the time they reach age 14. They're having more difficulties in that realm, and also having some increased mental health issues themselves, not just from their use, but exposure in utero. Anecdotally, we see some effects in other populations in the emergency department as well, and just how we'll deal with those. And we are open to trying to help capture that data, which is not always the easiest data to find as far as is a problem that a patient is experiencing directly attributable to cannabis use or not. But as y'all move forward, we'll try to provide what data that we can get that we can feel is can be validated as being accurate. The recommendation is what's been said other places or by other individuals, is that, we start slow and, 1 or 2 dispensaries and just kind of learn how those affect our community before we move to a larger number. So open to, questions if you have anything specific to the medical side.
I think we'll just take your comment at this point,
Okay.
but appreciate if you're available, if the council's to need your input at a later
Yes,
time.
I will be.
Thank you very much. Mr. Matthews, I heard that you were representing an organization that you'd like to speak for.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council, Planning Commission. Sorry, I'm being loud. Okay. My name is Troy Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of the Barton Foundation and a member of the Lake Tahoe Unified School District Board of Education. Actually, I'm here tonight on behalf of the Community Health Advisory Committee, which is a group of healthcare professionals and nonprofit organizations that meet to discuss unmet health needs in the community. And I want to thank the Cannabis Subcommittee for their work. I think they put in a lot of hours, and it's evident that they put in a lot of thought into this, and I want to thank them for their time. I believe these are good recommendations. I agree on behalf of the CHAC, the Community Health Advisory Committee, on a slow rollout approach backed by data. I think we need to take our time. I think we need to make sure that the public remains as safe as possible. I think everyone believes in cannabis decriminalization. I believe everyone thinks it's preferable that we regulate cannabis rather than allow the black market to persist. But I think there is a degree to which we have to take our time here and make sure that we do it correctly. I like where this conversation is headed. Because I think, as Dr. Tarwater was alluding to, we do have a problem in this community with substance use. We have an opioid problem. We have an alcohol problem. And I'm hopeful that these conversations on cannabis will lead to more discussions on public health in our community, not just about cannabis, but about all substance use. What are we doing about alcohol abuse? How can we help our fellow community members who are struggling with addiction? I think that's where this conversation needs to head. The Community Health Advisory Committee will be making recommendations to the City Council, and a lot of them are along the lines of the City Cannabis Subcommittee, concerned that adolescents will use marijuana prior to their brain maturation, and this poses a risk to their health and learning abilities. To use cannabis tax dollars to support an education campaign, I believe the Let's Talk campaign was what was recommended. Concerned that children will overdose on cannabis products such as edibles, so intervention using cannabis tax dollars to make free lock bags available and following the state regulations that edibles don't look appealing to children. And then concerned for increased problems with substance use in our community, use tax dollars to fund substance use education and treatment. Science-based substance use risk information and resources for treatment can be put in the free lock bags, which I believe was part of the recommendation, so we support that. And we also support the concept of a path back based on data collection as we move forward. So again, I want to thank everyone for their time, and thank you. And looking forward to seeing where this goes and where this conversation is headed. Thanks.
Mr. Bass, I know you are the executive director of our existing cannabis, so as representing that group, I was wondering if you wanted to speak next. After that, unless there's another organization, we will open it up to those that would like to speak, and we'll probably just have you line up against that wall and come up. So, Mr. Bass, please.
Good evening, Council and members of the Planning Commission. First I would like to note on a few things that are fact around the passing of Prop 64. As Californians, we have now voted for cannabis to not be a crime. The fact that we, as the City of South Lake Tahoe, are pointing so many directives to the police chief with this matter, I believe to be wrong. As we have voted 65% in this community that cannabis is not a crime, to hand and look to the directive of the guidance of this policy to the police chief, in my mind, is absolutely not correct. And if you look into the city of Sacramento, they've hired a cannabis enforcement officer that is familiar with these issues. If you look at the Mendocino County, they have handed this to the agriculture department, and these are found on that this is no longer a crime. So we've really got to stop looking at this and really stop directing our precious law enforcement resources towards something that is clearly not a crime when we have opioid crises and real things that the law enforcement and the police chief should be focusing on. Secondly, I'd like to go into the fact that I really appreciate the work of the subcommittee. I think that they've come up with some great recommendations. However, I think there are some major issues within it, and I believe that exists based on the fact that there has not been an expert that comes from the cannabis industry that directly touches the plant year after year. We talked about Dustin Moore, who is an industry expert. However, he has not been here for the last few subcommittee meetings. He didn't show present tonight. We had a stakeholders meeting that I was invited to. He was not present there. And many of these recommendations that I disagree with, from what I understand, directly came from his advice, such things as no micro business, no distribution. I explained in the last council meeting how not allowing distribution or micro business really hinders the ability for a healthy cannabis industry to evolve and emerge in our town. For instance, if we don't have distribution in this town, but we allow for cultivators and we allow for manufacturing, somebody from West Sacramento has to come into our town to transact all of our business. That means to bring the cannabis from a cultivation site back into Sacramento, divide it, and then bring it back into South Lake Tahoe to sell it to a dispensary. That creates a huge increase in cost that we really need to look, and I'm glad to say that the Cannabis Subcommittee did now recommend for distribution to take place. However, on the flip side of it, they have recommended that we don't allow for type 6 non-solvent extraction, but we will allow for manufacturing to happen. That basically will make nobody want to build a manufacturing business in town. The ability to manufacture, you must have the ability to extract. I completely agree with not allowing the type 7 non-solvent or solvent extraction for this time, at least, to look at later. But at this time, we have to allow type 6 extraction. To think that somebody's going to come and build an edible company in town and drive to Sacramento to get their, basically, the majority of what they need to make their product it's just not reasonable, and nobody would build a business or step into South Lake Tahoe to build a manufacturing business if we do not allow one type of extraction. The type 6 extraction license is all non-solvent, so there is no risk of explosion, there is no need for blast doors. On the state regulative level, they have not asked for any of those type of requirements for the type 6 license. So I really believe that if you're going to allow for the cannabis industry to evolve in a healthy way in South Lake Tahoe, you must revisit these type of things. Most licensed edible manufacturers, solvent manufacturers are also going to be cultivators, and the point of this is to be able to build a company that you really are using the whole plant. Most cultivators are going to want the ability to extract and possibly also the ability to have and make manufactured products. We must really look again at the micro business license. For one thing that is very disheartening to me throughout this discussion is that we don't look at the legally existing business of Tahoe Wellness Cooperative that has been standing here for 9 years. And as Chief Euler wants to say, oh, you know, let's go with one business, which we very strongly disagree with. We've had to exist here as the only one for 5 years, and as many people think it's great, it's about one of the worst things for us because we haven't been able to build an alliance. We really have a microscope always on us instead of how can we create this as a bigger and better thing for the community. And so the idea that we wouldn't be considered in that one, which come from his recommendation that it would be in the industrial zone when we're clearly not in the industrial zone, shows the intention. And I think it's very disheartening to not look at the fact that we are a micro business and we've existed as that micro business legally for a long time. So the recommendations kind of go against our existing legal operation.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Unless there's another large organization, is there someone that's representing an organization? You are. Oh, please come forward, and then we'll go. I see that there's a few waiting on the side. Thank you.
My name's Kelly, excuse me, members of the council, planning commission, appreciate you guys all being here. My name's Kelly Chisolano. I represent Pure Life Collective in Diamond Springs. We are an operating licensed state micro business, so we have our BCC license. We are in El Dorado County. We've been there since 2000. We were incorporated in 2010. We did have a run-in with El Dorado County Sheriff. We had a court trial, and at the end of our pre-trial, all of our 7 felonies were dropped because they had lack of evidence, meaning we ran our business the way it was supposed to be ran. They had nothing to take it to trial. So we reopened. We were closed the whole time. We were asked to be, or we were in trial. We didn't conduct any business. We kept open for meetings, and then, we reopened. It would be 2 years ago today. So, or 2 years ago yesterday. As I presented at the last meeting, my doors are open, my books are open. We have a model business. We'd like to participate. I grew up in El Dorado County in Camino and went to all of my college here in South Lake Tahoe, and would love to see this community do the right thing in the right way. I'm part of the ad hoc committee in El Dorado County and sit with their group. I think that between the two groups, I don't know how it would work, but there's been talk at our meetings of trying to meet with other city councils, planning commissions, so that we can, share knowledge and share that wealth of what we're all working on, that common goal. I think I dropped off information for city council. I didn't bring another packet for everybody today, but I can, if you guys can share the information. My doors are open, my books are open. I'm open to tours or any questions that you might have. The way that our micro business is set up, El Dorado County does not have cultivation as one of their allowances. They have us with retail, distribution, and then manufacturing only P type. So we can only package and label cannabis. We cannot, we can't create products essentially. But thank you guys for your time and all your work on this, and looking forward to it progressing and being able to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll start with our line, and if you'd like to, sir, if you'd like to come forward, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your name, and then
This is speed dating.
you'll have, you'll have 3 minutes. So when you hear the little ding-dongy thing, it'll be
Sounds good. I'm Craig Johnson from Alpenglow Farms in southern Humboldt County. I just happened to be here on vacation, so I figured I'd stop in and say hi. We've been part of the process in Humboldt County for quite some time. We had a very forward-thinking community and building department and general government. And all that said, you guys are very well organized here, and I see you're moving slow before you move fast, because once you start the process, it's important for these folks that are putting thousands and thousands of dollars into their businesses to help it move along quickly and to not have it bottleneck. One of my sayings is, let's not cross the ocean to die on the beach. And that's where I feel we're at now in Humboldt County. With my 6 state intern licenses, I still don't have a Humboldt County full license. I'm still under an intern process there. And there's still more regulations that I have my Fish and Wildlife. I have all these other agencies that I complied with, but it's sitting with the planning department. And my permit at the moment, because planning got so overwhelmed, was set out to Sacramento. So now, instead of trying to keep jobs in a location or a localized area to promote more revenue, Sacramento's making money on my permit, and they're just actually slowing it and extracting more money from us. And it sounds like there's a lot of money in cannabis, but at the moment there's not. It'd be like an auto manufacturer wanting to come here and them having to pay full sticker on every bit, on their real estate, on their taxes, and having no form of loans available to them. So we sold $500,000 in cannabis last year, but we are still upside down, and we will be for, I'm hoping, not less than 3 more years, or not more than 3 more years. So I heard some of the things, and this gentleman spoke to a lot of those little bullet points I made, and it's the micro business and helping keep some of these small providers, cultivation, storefronts, manufacturers, really creating some of these, you know, in my case, we're a small family farm. We have 15,000 square feet. I have a wife that attends HSU and 2 small daughters, 7 and 12, and we have no issues with any of the drug things that you guys might think it comes with this. We don't even consume alcohol in our house, for that matter. As far as for enforcement, yes, it definitely does need to be divided up into your ag departments and so forth. And to speak to the chief for a moment, a lot of this, if you actually get the cameras open to you, you'll be able to do so much armchair enforcement, I call it. That was done literally with Google Earth on my farm from the state. But I have a lot of information to offer this whole team here, and I'm not a consultant. I just have a lot of experience in this, and I left a card with the chief, and I left a card with planning department over here.
Thank you very much.
And I'm going to leave one other thing. On your micro...
very quickly.
Yep, on your manufacturing, it's really nice to have the cultivators to be able to make their own pre-rolls, tinctures, ice water hash, and rosin. Those are all non-volatile substances. They can go directly from the cultivator to the retail.
Thank you,
and
sir.
that's a really nice outlet for those folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you can find us on Instagram at Alpenglow Farms.
And just a reminder going forward that we really only have a short amount of time, so what we would ask you to direct is your comments about our ordinance and its relationship here in South Lake Tahoe. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nobia Cubby. Thank you very much for your heart-filled discussion tonight, Chief, and I do appreciate the things that you point out about the teenage community and also some of the other members that spoke about the teenage community. But I also want to remind you to go back and look at some of the data that has been collected in the last 4 years since Colorado has become legal. They're finding that when they polled larger audiences that actually they found that the teen rate has remained flat. And so as a segue to that, I'd like to just add that opening more dispensaries, 3, okay, I like the idea that you want to start slow and increase as long as your intent is to stick with that concept of pilot programs, but it actually lowers the black market, and that has been proven over and over. I mean, how many wine companies are out there, moonshining? They're just not. Napa is just was vibrant before the fire. So I think we kind of just got to keep our feet grounded into reasonableness and look at this more like the regulating is going to help lower the black market. And on that, I'd like to add to Cody's comment, we absolutely have to have both the non-volatile and the micro license. That is essentially what all of us, we work around that fundamental paradigm. The grower, like the gentleman that just spoke, the whole flower moving from a frozen state to the rosin is called a live rosin, and you can't make that product if you're, there's just no way to do that. We're shutting down all of these vibrant companies that operated under Prop 215. I'm Cubby Cryogenics. Our proprietary method is all about how we extract it, and it has to start from the flower. So eliminating both the micro business and the non-volatile, you're just eliminating a lot of the local businesses that operated legally under Prop 215. So I think a really good idea would be for you to sit down and have a discussion with the cannabis community that thrived under Prop 215, and I would really invite you all to create an educational environment where you can come, we can table, and you can come and talk to us and learn about us who had businesses under Prop 215 in this community and would like to have a business development plan with you where we could move forward under a structured, economically viable plan for the community that already exists, and small batch, micro businesses, they're not leaching out, and there's not cannabis escaping through. They want to take everything they grew and got it into their products that render a higher return on their money anyway. They don't want to just like sell little baggies of weed out on the side of their industries. That's just fantasy, really it is. I think there's plenty of data for you to go and look that up and find that out from. There's plenty of regulations that are going down right now and a lot of success stories. So thank you for your time, and thank you all on the committee that gave your time and your energy, and what a beautiful presentation. So I feel like we have a lot to move forward with, but please, the micro business and the non-volatile.
Thank you, Ms.
Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yes, Angela Swanson.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the Planning Commission, and the Cannabis Subcommittee. I'm Angela Swanson, a member of the Lake Tahoe Unified School District Board of Education and the Community Health Advisory Committee. And I want to thank you all first. You've done clearly a very good process, a thoughtful process. I'll limit my focus to the areas that affect me as a board member and representing the youth of our community. As for the adults, I have no issues with it. I do want to thank you and agree with some of the recommendations you've made and congratulate you and thank you for being very thoughtful. 1,000 feet around schools I think is absolutely adequate and necessary. I know that 600 could be the minimum you could do. You could go lower. I think where you're at is the right place. I would say that the 150 feet around daycares, I have concerns with if the regulation is not strict about keeping it out of residential neighborhoods and enforcement is not good, because otherwise that can impinge very closely on environments where young children are. So I would put that in as a caveat and something to watch. I also appreciate the parks and public space buffers you are providing for so that all people who recreate and live here can enjoy those spaces equally and thoughtfully without feeling someone else's recreational enjoyment impinges on them. I will tell you, the biggest concern I have is with the dollars going out of the local taxes and where they go, and that they go to prevention and education and therapeutic uses. The kids we are seeing come through our schools now, Gen Z, are materially and intrinsically different from any generation we've seen before. Dr. Toller already talked to you. We've over 50 kids that have actively identified and are in counseling for suicidal tendencies. That's a historic number we have never seen before in a community of our size. And it's not about us, it's about the generation, which means access to cannabis with its depressive and stimulant properties can be very worrisome for their health and ours. We need to count on those dollars locally to be used for student resource officers, education and prevention programs, and to really look at the brain science. I will challenge the speaker prior to me who said that in Colorado they found that youth or teenage issues didn't change. It does. The data that's coming out is showing we have to be very careful, and it's really about a why wait campaign for our youth. The last piece connected with this is just a caveat I'd like to remind you about why I'm so focused on local dollars going to SROs, to social workers, to intervention in our schools. When the tobacco tax was passed, that money did not go into tobacco education. It actually was diverted primarily into First Five, a worthy cause, but it was diverted away from doing the purpose that was intended. In my conversations with friends who work in the industry and lobbyists and in Sacramento, there's not a lot of confidence that those dollars will really translate into meaningful programs that can help us educate our youth to make thoughtful, good decisions for their health as they move forward. And with that, believe it or not, I am done before my time. Miss Lane,
That deserves
my
a
time is paid off.
If it's very quick. Angela, one real quick clarifying question from one of our council members.
So my initial thought was that the revenue raised from taxes on cannabis would go more towards opioid prevention and reigniting SLEDNet. And we're hearing a lot of talk about money going to the school, and the state is giving out money if you legalize it. So there isn't enough money really for both. So do you want it to go to opioid and the SLEDNet operation, or do you want it to go to fund to SROs? Angela?
Me personally, I would put it into SROs and what we're dealing with there, because the data we are seeing in the school district relates more to cannabis use and general conditions of kids living in poverty and what they're exposed to, as opposed to the broader opioid issue that's going on in our community. But I think it's not really what Angela says or wants. It's really having a thoughtful discussion and let the data drive us, which, again, is part of what that whole path back thought that Councilmember Davis advocated for, that we support.
Thank you. Did you have a quick comment, Mr. Middlebrook?
Yeah, just to clarify, the subcommittee, in our conversations, we really wanted to see the revenue generated from cannabis primarily go back to enforcing cannabis education, prevention, youth outreach, enforcement. We do not think that the cannabis revenue should fully fund SLEDNet and be counted on to solve our opioid problems and heroin problems and methamphetamine problems and gang problems in this community. Maybe it can help, but we don't expect this to be the cure-all and responsible for those problems that are a whole nother issue to tackle.
Thank you. Mr. O'Malley?
We're at a point where you remember my name. Great. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's nice to be recognized. I'm going to try not to be all over the place. It's been a long day for a lot of people. I don't believe we've met yet. Thank you, Planning Commission. We've had a chance to meet and talk with the committee and council. Thank you for your time. I kind of touched on that this morning. I just want to reiterate how great I thought it was to be part of that stakeholders meeting, because I really felt like it was not us versus them. It was us working together, and I think that really is the approach to such a complicated issue in our town now. I do want to address a couple things that Chief Euler said, but more so with the committee. I like the aspect that we are focusing on healthcare and education and preventative programs and everything that I feel that these tax dollars should be put towards. I myself used to be a teacher. I am going to be a parent of two probably tomorrow. So it is important to me that my kids grow up understanding what the risks are, but that it's not something that they want to rebel against and partake in because it's something that's not out in the open and that the education is not available for them. Kind of shifting gears towards Chief Euler's comment, echoing what Cody had to say. We've been here for a while, and if you're talking about putting in a new cannabis dispensary, and we should go with one, then I invite you to work with us to start. But like Cody said, we've never been against competition. We're not looking to be a monopoly in Tahoe. We would like to all work together to inevitably get whatever I think everybody here wants, is to get this right and to do it the proper way. So to say that we're not authorized again, and I don't mean to be beating a dead horse here, but if you want a dispensary and you want to authorize that dispensary, we're here. A lot of you have already come in and seen what we've done, and I really think that we can offer you that education. Come in and see how we do the non-volatile extractions. See how rosin is made, see how hash is made, and see that being able to use the resources that we have on hand is a lot more beneficial for you, because I know there is the concern of diversion, right? If we give all these license types, then there's more of a chance of diversion. Well, you've been to Tahoe Wellness. It's all under one roof. It's less diverse, or however you would phrase that. Did I say that right? Anybody? If you come in, then you'll be able to see that it's probably better off to have a micro business license where we can put all of this under one roof, and we can actually maximize our waste and all around benefit the community in the end. So there's a lot more that I want to say.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really tired. you're tired.
I
I'll
am.
let you go. Thanks for remembering my name, and I hope to look forward to getting micro business license.
Thank you. I have one question. Are you going from 0 to 2 tomorrow, or?
I have a 2.5-year-old.
Okay.
And I'm having another baby boy tomorrow, hopefully. The due date's tomorrow, so thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah.
No, I'm a twin, but no.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That was my burning question. What's he doing standing here tonight if he's going to have twins tomorrow? Okay.
Let's see this go through. It's important.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you guys so much for having us. This will be really, really quick, I promise. So I would just like us to encourage, my name's Amelia. I would just like us to encourage everyone to look at the environmental effects. And so if we're being specific about separating distribution license, so you can't manufacture where you distribute and so on, we're asking for a lot more driving and environmental constraints that'll hurt the beautiful environment we live in. So I'd like us to look a little more into detail into making sure that we're not hurting our physical environment as well as our social one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Charles Willett. I'm the owner of Tahoe Honey Company, one of the medical collective delivery services that operates out of Truckee. We've been making deliveries to the patients all around Lake Tahoe on the California side of things for over 2.5 years. And we're allowed to operate out of Truckee while the town council provides us a pathway to licensing because they realize that we operate with extreme discretion and care for all of our patients. We pay a great deal in taxes, we create full-time jobs for locals, and we want nothing more than to be a great partner in the community, not a thorn in your side. The chief of police in Truckee truly enjoys and has said so that we don't cause any issues. Why would we? We're here to set an example of how things can and are being done the right way. We're known to not cause one issue ever in North Lake or in South Lake because of the care by which we screen our patients and deal with our deliveries with care and discretion. There are little to no calls that go into local police dealing with the issues of cannabis patients. There are countless for all of the bars and love for all things alcohol. Just to touch on some of the things that you guys talked about today, with signage, green crosses are extremely tacky and make our businesses look less professional. We want to contribute to a more classy side of South Lake, not tacky advertising. There's no need to make this anything like Vegas, where there's flashing green crosses. In terms of the local authorities, the all the time video access would be welcomed by any of us retailers. In terms of the access to the business records without cause, I would just urge that maybe be done by like a city auditor or someone who has deep knowledge of business dealings and isn't coming at it from a different point of view. In terms of on-site consumption, allowing us business owners to adequately train our employees to ensure that on-site consumption is done safely, such as any bar owner or manager that you guys allow with the hundreds of bars that are around here. Similar to a cigar room on the filtration aspect of things, we definitely, people in this industry, if we're doing things professionally and properly, we know how to adequately control smell to where you don't know anything that's going on. They can be set up and maintained to properly control smells, and this goes to cultivators as well, to where you don't have to walk down, even if it's a 5,000 or 10,000 square foot cultivation room, you don't have to smell it. You absolutely do not have to. In terms of delivery services, there are licenses that are called the retail non-storefront. That alleviates this chance of monopolies, and that wasn't necessarily addressed. It is a little odd to me to think of that only the retail owner would get to dictate who is delivery services underneath them. That really gives the chance for monopolies or for certain retailers to control all the channels of delivery. There's GPS trackers that also are required by state law for every delivery service as a part of that track and trace program, just to let you know. And there's a few other regulations that weren't mentioned.
Thank you for sharing with us.
And thanks.
Appreciate
it.
Yes. Please, next.
Hello, my name is Robert Feskins, and I've had a chance to speak to you guys a few times.
And I want to thank the entire group for being out here tonight. And it's usually a morning deal. I missed dinner. Hope the rest of you didn't. Maybe that's later. But again, thank you for all the work that's been put into the subcommittee. I'm very impressed with everything that you guys have put together in a really short time. I was expecting it to be a lot longer, and I think the recommendations are spot on. I wanted to just mention a couple of things that have been mentioned tonight, because I think you're looking for suggestions rather than me getting into, oh, my experience and so forth. That'll all be in the business plan, right? But really, as I have to go back to the subcommittee's recommendation. My fear is if we go too low with maybe one location, it's just the fight to block the black market's going to be too stiff. And I think while we're trying to get used to things with one location, we're going to lose traction. We're going to be in an uphill battle from here on out. And that's why I respect what the subcommittee has mentioned. I think 3 is probably right on for retail. We don't have to go to nearly the number of locations that the chief mentioned. And he's kind of, I think, throwing out the total exposure number. But maybe it is just 3 retail, a couple of grows, perhaps 1 or 2 micro businesses. And we've got a real good cross-section that's going to give us that traction that we need to fight the black market with. In terms of education, I have an 11-year-old son. I've mentioned this to you guys before, and there's no one in this room that's more interested in making darn sure that our youth is protected and educated about not only marijuana, but some of the other drugs that were mentioned. And I can tell you that from the youth perspective, the fear tactics are worthless. They're way smarter than that. These kids are looking for facts, and my son will tell you right now, he will quote what we've all said here tonight, that it takes 26 years for your brain to develop, which I'm kind of excited about because we give him a bottle of wine each year for his birthday. We've been saving that, and we're hoping he won't drink by the time he's 21. We'll take care of that for him. But seriously, the education piece it's a combination of those, maybe the tax dollars we're talking about with the 3.5%. I like the idea that Mr. Sass mentioned toward the heavy drugs, but if that does go toward that, I can tell you that our dispensary will still provide more money to go toward our youth when it comes to marijuana and anything related above that. We've got a great opportunity, as mentioned by a grower earlier, to really help out law enforcement, Chief, because we're going to have the whole digital aspect is huge, from the cameras that we're talking about to the tracking systems that we can use with every purchase so that we can track people that have potentially warrants for their arrest, all the way to just giving you guys facts and figures on the numbers in terms of sales and everything related to that.
Mr.
So
Paskins.
anyway,
Thank you.
I'm excited. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Curry.
I'm Joy Curry Norm. I like to address the City Council and the Planning Commission. One of the issues that really I believe that the Commission might want to rethink is micro-business. Having been a previous business owner in the city of South Lake Tahoe, it is very difficult to make a living in a business, any type of business. My assumption is that you all believe that these dispensaries are going to be making money hand over hand, and there will be no problem making a profit. I tend to disagree. No one here has mentioned Slack. We have 22,000 people here. We have 3 dispensaries that we are planning on opening. During Slack, the number of tourists here go to 0. So there will be a profit margin of maybe 6 to 7 months for these dispensaries. 5 months of the year, they will be struggling to make a profit. You have put a lot of taxes on these businesses for very good reasons. I mean, I support the education, but you have to be realistic about what you're going to tax them and where it's going to go. And I believe the most important place for it to go is education of our youth. So I just want to bring the fact that being a business owner in South Lake Tahoe is difficult no matter what your business is and you're putting more fees on these businesses than any other businesses in town, and they are still going to have to contemplate the slack that we have because we are a tourist industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bergner, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Greg Bergner. I'm a retired family doctor. And I just want to say a couple things. First, to express my support for going slow. I do think that there is, it's much easier to expand than to contract. The second thing that I would say to consider is the data points and the education and the decisions that are going to be made to define what those data points are in advance. The city is unique in that you're really kind of removed from the education system. How are you going to partner like they were, I think it was Mr. Fabino that mentioned, how are you going to share, if you tax, how are you going to share that requirement and the cost for data gathering with a hospital or with a school district? And then the last thing that I would say is that I hope you don't feel rushed to develop an ordinance. Give yourself time to try things and to change them if they need to be after they've actually been implemented, before you develop the final ordinance. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's about almost 7:45, so I know I'm going to let him speak. I was just like letting the audience know that we'll take comments till about 5 to 8, and then we're going to kind of start wrapping this up. So.
My name is Benjamin Maitolka. I'm a local here in town. Thank you all for being here, and thank you very much for considering cannabis in our community. I know many of these people appreciate it. My only question is, with respect to the selection of entities for a development agreement, what measures does the city intend to take to guarantee transparency and fairness during this process? I just want to make sure it's transparent up front.
Hi, my name is Lisa Gresham Gordon, and I'm going to be really, really quick. I'm a South Lake Tahoe resident, and it's important that you know that I'm speaking to you as such, but I needed a job, so I went and got one, so I'm a little bit ahead of you. I really, really like what you've done. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity that you're going to give to South Lake Tahoe, and I know you're going to do it. You're going to do it right. 3 dispensaries, awesome. I think that's right. Sounds like that tax rate is just right on in there. Where'd you guys get that? Awesome. Micro business, it's important. It's important. You've got to have micro business. We are all inclusive Tahoe. We have got to have everything that we need up here on the top of the hill. No more driving in the snow. And I'm really sorry that Dustin Moore couldn't be with us. I really appreciate his time coming all the way up from Sacramento. Maybe he just couldn't drive in the snow, so he hasn't been able to make it up here. Micro business, keep that going. That's important. And the zoning issues that you came up with parking, really important. Stick some zoning in there and some planning. Sharing parking lots is not fun, I can tell you that. You don't want anybody double parking and stopping. Thank you for your time. Get it going. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else in line to speak, which is nice for a tired council. I'm going to bring it back very quickly to any closing council comments and or direction at this point. And also, if there are any closing comments from our Planning Commission or Mr. Fabino from you before we close out tonight. I'll start with saying how appreciative I am of everyone that's come tonight, the mutual respect you have shown for each other and for us as decision makers. It is greatly appreciated. These are big topics, and many of you advise us to go slow, and it is a big topic, and we're taking your advice very seriously, and we will be very deliberate in moving forward with your continued input as well. So any other comments, closing things from council members?
Yeah, I'll just jump in real fast. One of the things I remember when there were, I think, 5 states that had ballot measures on for legalizing cannabis, and the governor of Colorado, they were asking him about his experience, and one of the things he said, and he urged every state to do, was collect baseline data, get data now. And I know all the docs from Barton mentioned that, Dr. Tarwater mentioned that. So I guess with subcommittee, I would encourage you guys, I don't know what data you guys have collected already, but I definitely would be interested in seeing what data we have, and then also looking at what data we want to be collecting in the future, and then how we're going about that. I think it's so important so we can gauge our success or our failures.
I don't know if I can speak on that just as the coordinator for the South Tahoe Drug-Free Coalition. We are in the process of applying for an additional 5 grants so we can continue our work here. So we are collecting as much data as we can, and we've been in coordination with Barton Hospital as well as the school district and the police department. And we're going to be publishing our results soon, so just have that. And just from what we have collected, it doesn't look good. Although rates of substance use in the schools from the California Healthy Kids Survey has shown that it's going down within kids, their perception of harm has severely decreased, and so they have an acceptability of it, and as well as what they think their parents will think. So I think it's something to really be concerned about, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how the next California Healthy Kids results look based on legalization next year. So.
Cool. Thank you very much. And thanks to the subcommittee and to the community. I think this has been a great example of how we can engage in a collaborative process and really work towards hopefully a very successful outcome.
Sorry, Jude Wood. I was just going to add that we also need to bear in mind that until the 1st of this year, it was illegal. So, for example, at the Boys and Girls Club, we've collected data for a number of years, but we also have to appreciate that perhaps people weren't completely honest in that data collection. And so that is going to affect the data as well at this time. But we're going to do our survey this week of our teens, and as soon as that comes out, I will share it with the City Council.
Yeah, I think I visited about 15 towns in Colorado and spoke to shop managers or shop owners, and certainly have heard a lot from Oakland-based businesses, you know, at the League of California Cities and other places. And my general thoughts on where we should go with this really haven't changed too much. I really like what Breckenridge did with the micro businesses outside the main core, but I'm also open to perhaps having a retail shop or two in town at just, you know, has an environment where when you walk in the store, you really wouldn't know you were in a cannabis store because there's no smell, there's no consumption, and I've seen a couple of those in Colorado that are really good. But that's my thoughts on it, and I'd like to see the tax, and I'd like to see a development agreement in the short term until we get to the tax in the November ballot. But really the question is, what do we do next? Because there's a lot of things that need to be decided, you know, number of stores, where they can be located. And so what is the process, and how do we get to a tax initiative, and how do we get to a development service agreement, and how do we decide who decides, who gets that? And there's just so many other things we need to work on. So I guess the question is, what's next?
It's a big question that no one's jumping into.
I just want to say I'm listening still. And I think we need at least one more public forum and some input. People probably couldn't make it tonight for whatever reason, but we want to make sure the public has every opportunity. This is a major issue to our community, major issue to our citizens. So I just want to make sure we get all the input we can get and not be criticized later. Well, you didn't give me a chance because you held it at night or you held it in the morning or whatever. So I do think we need one more meeting, and then we start giving direction from there.
Madam Mayor, can I just make one comment for the record? We have received a total from the web streaming that 179 people are watching online live at this. Pardon me? It's over 200 now. Oh, it's over 200 now. Thank you.
Great. Well, that.
It's recorded.
that
And that will
really
also be
expands the number of
available
people.
for viewing as it is being recorded.
Well, speaking about logistics, it's February 20th. The working group's goal was to try to get before the Planning Commission on their meeting in March. They meet once a month, the second Thursday of the month, Chairman Brown. And so that would be March 8th. We have a council meeting March 6th. And we have constantly this, cart before the horse type of mentality. Like, we want to go slow and we want to do it right, but we hurry up. We're hearing like both sides of it. So if we're going to do another hearing, I would want to lay out a little bit more of what the process is. I think the working group has, and the subcommittee therefore as well, has done what we were asked to do. We were asked to present recommendations for an ordinance. We have done that once, twice. How many more? This is accomplishing a lot in that we're all getting educated and we're having that conversation, but we're almost all in agreement on a lot of it as well. It needs to get to a point where it becomes some kind of working document that can then be brought to the various spots along the way in order to keep moving this forward. So I believe that where we're at right now is in the form of a draft ordinance that can be brought before the Planning Commission. There's not a lot that I have heard in the recommendations from the working group that will affect necessarily the Planning Commission from a zoning standpoint, right? But what I do think, it's a requirement that it has to go through you. So if we can at least take that step and then bring it before the council, we can still put a workshop in between if we want, or we can start the process of a first reading and maybe not do a first reading and move to a second, but at least we've gotten through the Planning Commission and we're working it through the council. If we don't do that on March 8th, then we have to wait a full month again. And so I'm looking for some direction. If we're not going to keep this ball rolling, what is it that you want us to do at this point? We can't just keep having the presentation.
And I think your comments are right on, because there will be opportunities once we get the ordinance drafted that the public will have a couple more opportunities. The Planning Commission, I would suggest 2 readings in the city, so there will be ample opportunity. And I think what the public is also saying is we need to make some of these decisions on micro businesses and stuff that can be in the ordinance, that they can weigh in on. So, yeah, I agree. I think the process can move forward with that, and that would work.
No, I don't support going to an ordinance right now. There's too many big issues, like the micro business, the locations, the zoning, things Kevin brought up. We've got some major policy decisions as a council that need to be made. And until those are made, I don't see the use in putting our city attorney to work on an ordinance when the basics haven't been agreed to by council by at least a 3-2 vote of some type, or 4-1 or 5-0. Things like the micro businesses are too big an issue, locations are too big an issue, and numbers too big an issue.
I'm not suggesting we go to ordinance. I'm suggesting we have that discussion in City Council, decide what we want to do. Then after we decide what we want to do, then we go to the city attorney to write an ordinance.
Well, and I disagree completely with the idea that we have to figure out all this big stuff, of which there's not a lot, there's a few. There's a few big items that we need to figure out. I get that. But there is no reason why we can't have working language in front of us that can be modified so that we can continue to move this process forward. We proved that with the vacation home rentals. We wrote many renditions of an ordinance before it was finally passed, and we have the opportunity and the right to do that. But from my opinion, working group has done their job. Subcommittee has delivered the recommendations. We must keep the process moving. We still have ample time to work out all of the the few controversial things that are left. There's time to do that. And we can roll that out before the council. If we can go to the Planning Commission on March 8th, get this into the council's hands, council can delay this every 2 weeks for the next 3 months if they want to.
There's a monstrous difference between allowing a micro license and the current recommendations of council.
I would actually push back on that. Under our current regulations, one of the people that came up and left public comment said on the West Slope, his micro license consists of a Type P manufacturing license, a Type R retail, and D for distribution. Under our current regulations, despite it not being technically a micro business permit, someone could attain each 3 of those license types and operate in the exact same manner. If you want to address Type 6 non-volatile and allow that, that makes sense to then allow micro businesses. I think that the decision around micro businesses is less of a decision around micro businesses because you can still put together those license types as we are recommending now. It's more of a discussion around whether you want Type 6 non-volatile extraction or not.
The ordinance itself would be monstrously different if there is a micro licenses allowed versus not allowed. And that, I'm not talking about the decision there, I'm talking about the work that has to be done by the city attorney in crafting an ordinance. Big difference between allowing a micro business and what you're currently recommending with no delivery and other things.
I'm not a lawyer, but I respectfully disagree.
May I ask for the city attorneys to weigh in, please?
You got to do the work.
Yeah, yeah.
Nira?
Preparation of an ordinance, if the council is willing to take the subcommittee's direction, then I have sufficient direction to draft an ordinance. I do want to note that your planning director has informed me that in order to make the March 8th Planning Commission with a draft ordinance, that he would need an ordinance by February 26th, which is in 6 days, and I would venture to suggest that that's a bit too tight of a turnaround. The subcommittee has a lot of very thorough recommendations, and as I've said before, I think 10 to 14 days is sort of a minimum turnaround time. However, that would allow us to bring a draft ordinance to the council on the 6th, and then perhaps Mr. Fabino can speak to the Planning Commission.
Sure. Thank you very much. So in order for the Planning Commission to take up any matter in a public hearing, then one, we have a 10-day requirement for noticing. We have to put it in the paper. We also have to have all the documents in our hand ready for distribution to the Planning Commission, as well as make those available to the public. So we just, you know, if Nira can deliver it by the 27th, we're all
Mr.
good.
Fabino will help me.
But we do have a bit of regulatory noticing that would be required in order to make that date. And I mean, we would kind of need to know so that we, like today, so we could get that notices drafted and in the paper.
Madam City Attorney, what is your opinion on drafting the ordinance as recommended by the working group and then going back and having to change it if we decide to allow micro businesses? Would you prefer that we agree on the major policies first, or would you like to, how much work are we talking about? I think that was the question asked.
I think it's best that the council give me the direction it wants to go in before I draft an ordinance. There are so many variables, as you saw from your subcommittee report, in any given cannabis ordinance, that it's best to have some of those high-level issues at least considered and hammered out. Now, again, you have recommendations from your subcommittee that I believe would be sufficient for a sufficient ordinance, but you know, that whether or not you take that direction is not my question. I also want to suggest, as to timing, it is possible for the Planning Commission to schedule a special meeting if need be. And Kevin would work with the Planning Commission on that.
Absolutely. And we've done that before.
One of the things that I think we heard consistently throughout this evening as well was to take this slow. And it sounds like, perhaps from what I'm hearing, that we're more interested in a timeline than perhaps having some further conversations that maybe needs to be had before we actually do a draft ordinance, which I think will be a big stepping stone for us, because then we can look at it critically. I'm wondering if the council would entertain us bringing this back for our March 6th council meeting if we, and acting city manager, I don't know how much is on that meeting already, we seem to overload, but to talk about some of the things, Devin, I know that you listed some of those topics that the council, and with our public comment, during the meeting, still need to talk about, and then at that meeting, set forward, based on our conversation during that meeting, a timeline that might not feel quite so rushed for us.
Not to complicate the timeline more, but as you are aware, there's a potential cannabis ballot initiative for November, gathering signatures currently. So based on that, if we do move, I think, too slowly, we run into the chance of having the voters usurp everything we've done for that initiative.
Well, I'm hoping 2 weeks isn't that impactful.
So, Madam Mayor, I have a suggestion. You have a pretty good-sized agenda already on the 6th, including Snow Globe, which I suspect may take a little bit of time. But it seems to me that there are 4 or 5 issues that perhaps council needs to have a discussion at council level, and with those, make some decisions to give to the city attorney. I just don't know if you're going to have enough time on the 6th to be able to make that all happen.
Well, you're leaving us in a very tenuous situation, like we don't know what you want. What more do you want from, is probably a good question to ask, what is it that you want from either the working group or the subcommittee at this point? Is council willing to just take it over and have some kind of plan, or do you still want our assistance, or what is it? What is your vision of how this is going to roll out?
I'm ready for council to take it over and make some of the high policy decisions.
Yeah, me too.
I think we've had great input. I guess the only thing, if the subcommittee was willing, I do feel like perhaps we could have more conversation or additional input, unless they're very set on the merits of micro-business. That seems to be one of the big topics that we're discussing.
Like I said, those will be public meetings, get additional input.
So I guess then my thought would be, we have a regularly scheduled council meeting for March 6th and another one on March 20th. If at one or the other, the council has made these high-level policy decisions, we could ask at that point for the Planning Commission perhaps to have a special meeting that would allow for a draft ordinance, well, an ordinance at that point, to come before you prior to our April 3rd meeting. Is there an appetite for that? And if so, what are the deadlines that you would require to hold a special meeting?
So again, what date did you pick?
Well, I'm saying the council would like to discuss this matter again on March 6th. If there is consensus, then we wouldn't know until after March 6th. If there's not consensus, we would move to March 20th, and I'm asking...
So a couple things. Let's just hypothetically say you met on the 6th. I would need the following Monday, which would be March 12th, the draft in hand. And understand the draft would be substantially completed, right? Then if that were the case, again, because we could kind of get things lined up on the 12th, that means on the 22nd would be the earliest?
Right, and then if we use the meeting of the 20th, you would need the draft, no, you would need the ordinance by the 26th in order to meet on the 29th.
No, ma'am. No? Figure there's 2 weeks between, we need that ordinance 2 weeks prior generally speaking, before any, before it goes to council. So we would get it, so again, if you made your decisions on March 6th.
Right.
What that means for us is on the 10th, the following day, we would begin drafting the notice. The notice would be published on the 10th, because that's when we publish under paper of general circulation.
Is that a Saturday?
Yes. We would have to have the draft in our hands on the 12th.
Right.
Because the minute we publish the notice, we tell everybody that it's available for public review.
Right.
The following Friday is when we would actually send out the agendas for the 22nd.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So that's why we said we generally need 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks from when you want to go to when that planning commission meeting would be.
Also, the 6th is, just as a reminder, Ms. Lane, is the council meeting where we're discussing snow globe, which could be a long discussion.
My suggestion, maybe we can't do it on the 6th. We got so much. You cut me off?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
That maybe we hold a special meeting the next day on the 7th, and only this issue.
This is where I'm having a hard time, and then I'll be done. The logistic of bringing an ordinance of which we have 90% of it, the working committee just walked you through 90% of it, and 90% of it you said, we don't have an issue, we don't have an issue, we don't have an issue. That you have an issue on 3 or 4 other topics that are significant. I do not mean to undermine that. However, by waiting and not at least running it through the Planning Commission, which the issues that they're going to be looking at aren't even issues in the ordinance. So it would be best to get it through the Planning Commission and get it in the council's hands, and we can amend it and amend it. We have the majority of it. But by not at least getting it through the Planning Commission, by everything that you just laid out, we're not even going through the Planning Commission until 4/12, which means the very first opportunity we would have to bring it before the council would be the 17th. And it's really to Mr. Middlebrook's point, we've worked very diligently to deliver this. Let's not bog it down in bureaucratic, maneuvers that we don't need to. Please consider, we have 90% of the ordinance. Let's draft the whole thing the way the committee recommended it. That's what you asked for. You can still change it. Let's get it through the Planning Commission and get it into the council's hands.
If our changes were significant and had an effect on land use, which I imagine they could, because those are some of the areas we'd be talking about, wouldn't it then have to go back to the Planning Commission again?
No, the Planning Commission can make a recommendation on an ordinance, and then the City Council can choose to accept that recommendation or reject that recommendation. It wouldn't have to go back to the Planning Commission unless the City Council wanted it to go back to the Planning Commission.
So I think I hear you saying that one time at the Planning Commission, regardless of some changes that we would make, would not necessitate the Planning Commission approval on those changes, even if they related to zoning or land use or something.
If the Planning Commission receives the ordinance and wants to make changes to it, it has to go back to the Planning Commission. But once the Planning Commission makes its recommendation to the council, if the council completely rewrites the ordinance, it doesn't have to go back to the Planning Commission. But the Planning Commission might see the ordinance any number of times if they want to make changes to the ordinance.
It's not public comment time right now. This is council discussion, so I'm sorry.
So what are we going to do? I want to go home.
So can we make a motion? What are you looking for? Do you want direction?
So council, can we agree to send off a draft ordinance knowing that we may make significant changes so that we have a working document to work with and have it come to us? I actually don't think March 6th is good, but have that come to us on the March 20th meeting, knowing that we're going to have significant discussion?
Well, it just doesn't seem logical to me to draft an ordinance that could be substantially changed and not bring it back to the Planning Commission. Although, that being said, the city attorney has told me that that's kosher by California government codes. We would give them an ordinance, they would say that's okay, and then we would go back and we would make some significant changes, like, let's say, for example, we say micro businesses are only allowed in the industrial area, and they wouldn't have seen that during the first reading, but it baffles me, but the city attorney is saying that that's cool, so I don't know.
And to the council member's point, we could send it back to the Planning Commission if we chose to. These are all options. Let's just keep the ball moving.
Please. So if you'd like to put forward a motion, it looks like we're at that point where we're either going to take a motion. I would, if you're going to put forward a motion, recommend that it come to us on March 20th, however, because of the...
Madam Mayor, I would move that we direct...
Excuse me, we can't do a motion during a workshop?
Oh, during a workshop?
And give direction. Direction. We can vote on our direction. Thank you.
I would like to ask my fellow colleagues to give direction to our city attorney to draft the language based on the subcommittee cannabis working group's recommendations to be presented to the Planning Commission on March 8th and to come back before this body on March 20th.
It can't go to March 8th.
Why? Yes, it can. Why can't it go, if it's done on the 26th, it can go before the Planning Commission on the 8th, right?
Yes, but that is
Is that doable?
Very tight turnaround.
Okay, so then, can we agree then that we would direct our city attorney to begin drafting the language, and at such time that it is thoughtfully ready, that we would ask for the Planning Commission to perhaps convene a special meeting?
This is direction you asked.
This is direction.
So in direction, I think we need just to look for consensus of the council.
There needs to be a second part of that direction, is when do we come back as a council to discuss the parts of the ordinance that are perhaps are still up in the air?
That, I think, will depend on when the ordinance goes to the planning committee, and when you'll know then, once you get it, what your schedule will be, which then will indicate what schedule we'll be on.
Yes, ma'am, and I think I can speak on behalf of the Planning Commission. We clearly understand your interest in moving this along, so we will be diligent at staff and get you there as quickly as we can.
Okay, to move this along, then I'll agree with the direction that Brooks proposed.
I'd like to just poll the council to see if that's, okay. Jason, Brooke?
Yeah.
I'm okay with this, and gives us something to work with. Mr. Sass?
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but I still want to know when we're going to get back together to talk about the other issues.
I think I just explained that we will have a draft. It'll go through the plan. What I'm understanding, we're going to have a draft ordinance. It's going to go through the Planning Commission. As soon as they know their timeline, they're going to let us know. Then we will agendize it, for the soonest council meeting that we can. When we look at the ordinance, then when we go through all those parts of the ordinance, that's when we'll have the significant conversations on those parts of the ordinance that we need to discuss in depth.
Okay.
Great job, working group. Thank you for getting us here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Just think of us. We've been doing this for about 14 hours today, so we're ready to go home. Thanks.
Only 12.
Only 12.